Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here with us. Before I officially call the meeting to order, I'll just run through what's on our agenda this evening. Kim is ready in the booth for BevCam. And thanks again to Kim and BevCam. This is meeting 4 of 4 for the City Council this week, and Kim has been here for everyone, which is so important that BevCam is here providing access. So Kim, it's not an unnoticed thing. Thank you. And thank you to everyone who's joining us on BevCam. It's an important way to have increased access. And thank you to everyone who's here in the room with us and has been with us coming and attending so many meetings. It's incredibly important to have that participation, and it's really valuable to see you all here. With that, we have 2 items on our agenda this evening. We'll be taking up Order 65, which has been a lengthy process that we've been working on. This is National Grid New England Power Company's petition for a transmission line franchise. And then we do have one other agenda item, which is fairly brief, that we'll do afterwards, which is Order 189, just setting a public hearing on an out-of-cycle funding application to the CPC. So with that, I will officially call to order this special meeting of the Beverly City Council, Thursday, June 30th, 2022, 6:30 p.m. Ms. Kent, would you please call the roll?
Owen, Crawley.
Here.
Feldman.
Here.
Hausman.
Here.
Rand.
Here.
Rotundo, St. Hilaire.
Here.
Sweeney, and Flowers.
Here. Thank you very much, Ms. Kent. Councillor Feldman, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? And I would request that we remain standing for a moment of silence for Timothy Brennan, who is our former building inspector who died recently. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. So I do just want to mention as well, Councillor Rotundo is not with us this evening. Thursday is a work night for him at the restaurant, and we don't typically have Thursday meetings. I just want to mention that, so if folks are wondering, we wanted to not delay in scheduling this, and so he said if we had a quorum to please go ahead, but I wanted people to know that he's not here for a lack of desire, just for the restaurant work. Sometimes it's hard to get out of. So what I'd like to do, councilors, is, actually I'll back up for a moment. This meeting is, as I said, a part of a much longer process. Many folks in the room or watching on BevCam have been part of this or following it with us for quite some time. Our official process with this order, number 65, began in February when National Grid officially filed for this grant of location, although for residents in the room and for some members of the council, I know it began before that, when there had been opportunity to come to understand more about this project and begin to get involved, and especially for residents to advocate and to talk with their elected officials, with the mayor and his team. And so this has been an ongoing conversation in our community. And again, I just thank the residents because, as I said the other night, it's not nothing that you have your full day, your work, your jobs, your business, your errands, all the things that you do, and then come here for evening meetings and spend time with us to be involved in advocating. So I thank you for that. Tonight, we are at the portion of this, it is a public meeting, but the public hearing portion of the process, which has been open since March, closed on Tuesday morning, I guess, at about 1:15. So tonight we will be hearing councilors deliberate and make some decisions, but the floor won't be open for general conversation and discussion. But I do want to just begin. We are able to still consult with our attorney for legal advice or opinion. And so I'd like to begin, Mr. Miaris, by just asking if you would go to the podium if there's anything that you have for us before we begin. And then, councilors, what I'd like to do is handle the process of the meeting similar to how we handled the budget vote, although they're not the same kind of document. In terms of process, I'd like to do it similar where councilors will have a chance to make a general statement, overarching statement if you wish. And then I'll go through and ask if any councilors have come prepared with amendments that they want to make to particular conditions. I'll make a list of which conditions, and then we'll go back, work our way through, and if you are prepared to make an amendment, I'll ask that you make it in the form of a motion. If it gets a second, we will then discuss and vote on that amendment at that time, and that will then bring us to a vote on the final document. So with that, Mr. Miyares, please.
Good evening. Earlier this week, we circulated to you a new draft of the grant of location that reflects all the changes we talked about last time, as well as a few minor additions that we thought helped the document along to make it a little clearer and more user-friendly. Since that time, Brian Bertram and I have been mulling over the draft, and when you get to condition number 15, we have a suggestion for a further change to it. We, I think, are satisfied that substantively that's the only change that we are prepared to recommend. I recognize that new conditions, Councilor Houseman has just circulated. Others may have additional new conditions, and we'll deal with those as we get to them.
Thank you very much, Mr. Miyares. Stalling for a moment because I saw the mayor passing through, and I was going to say, Mayor Cahill is with us. I will say that when he comes in. I do want to just mention that we do have, in addition to Mr. Miyares and Mr. Bertram, who have been our outside counsel in this matter, our city solicitor, Stephanie Williams, is here, along with Dylan Benson, a member of her staff, and so thank you both for being here with us. So, councilors, as I said, I'd like to begin by going through, and if anyone would like to make a general statement, overarching statement about the process or the grant of location itself, this is your opportunity to do that. And so I will recognize councilors in turn if anyone would like to make a statement. But I will first say, His Honor the Mayor is here with us, Mayor Mike Cahill. Thank you for joining us, Mayor. Mayor, before I was just opening the floor for councilors to make a general statement, but I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to say. I want to give you an opportunity if you wish.
I'm good for the moment.
Okay, thank you. Councilors, anybody who had an overall statement or anything you'd like to say at this time? Councilor Rand.
Thank you so much. So I guess I'd like to start just by saying that I do feel like the collaboration between the citizen group and the citizens who've been involved with this project and the council and the administration has been really one of the most interesting and effective processes that I've participated in my 9 years on the council. Also, we had the latest meeting we've ever had in my 9 years on the council, so I think they're kind of, they come together. I'm really impressed with the list of conditions. I think there are things that we all sort of wish we could add to that. I think we've had good legal advice when it comes to that there are things that I wish I could add to it that are not really legally sound to include in this list of conditions. That being said, I do think that what we've come up with and the diligent work of the council and the citizen groups that participated and gave us feedback, I think are really the best that we can get, aside from Councilor Houseman's additions and maybe a couple other additions today. So I'm proud of the work that we've all done together in this process and sort of created a process that didn't exist before. This is a huge project that I really do think at the beginning, the very first years ago presentations, that we didn't really have the sense of how big this project was. So I know as a counselor I've learned a lot. I think that should this grant of location move forward, I think that actually the hardest part is yet to come. If these conditions are put in place, I think that the hard work is making sure that they're adhered to. And then also being very mindful of the project as it goes along. What is not, kind of like if there are any other things that are sort of falling through the cracks as the project goes on, if it does. So I think, you know, whether this passes tonight or not, there's still a lot of hard work in front of us. So that's all I'd like to share. I guess actually one more thing, sorry. One more
may.
thing. So some of you may know too that Ward 2, part of Ward 2 already has this infrastructure in it, which has been a really interesting part of the process for me as a counselor. So if you live in the Goat Hill area, you've already been living with this infrastructure, but it hasn't necessarily been a high quality infrastructure. Like the cable, from what we've been told or explained to, is the cable is just in the ground right now, like, I don't know, a half a foot underground, and right now on Wellman Street. So the reality is that for people who live in the Goat Hill area, for this project as proposed will actually create a better living situation for the Goat Hill neighborhood. That is not true of the other side of Ward 2. So the reality for the other half of Ward 2 is that they'll be experiencing a new infrastructure that they've never had to deal with before. And it will be a huge change for them. And, you know, I totally understand the emotional strain of thinking of that change and the disruption on top of that. So I think that's it's interesting that within Ward 2, there are sort of reasons to embrace the project, better infrastructure, safer cables, safer living environment in general on the Goat Hill area. And then in the other half of Ward 2, having such a major change does not make me want to embrace the project. So that's sort of just as a counselor, the things that I've been weighing and struggling with and trying to gain feedback from my own constituents. So thanks.
Thank you very much, Counselor Rand. Are there other counselors? Counselor Sweeney.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd first like to thank the residents who have emailed us and who have taken the time to come to these public hearings. It's well known at this point that we as a city were put in a difficult position given that the proposed route had already been approved by the state's Energy Facilities Siting Board. But I think even given those circumstances, we've reached a pretty good agreement for the city, with many of these conditions being born from you all as residents yourself, who have taken the time to come and speak before us. Specifically, I think the Citizens Advisory Committee is a very important provision of this grant of location that would not have come about had it not been for the advocacy of many of the impacted residents. And this way we'll make sure that your voices are going to continue to be heard throughout the actual work of the project, as Councilor Rand said, the difficult part once the route gets underway. And the other thing I'd like to just quickly take a moment to thank the administration who took the time, specifically Commissioner Collins, to work with National Grid to get a revised figure for the total cost of repaving for the city. Obviously, we've been facing difficult economic conditions in the last 2 or so years since the agreement was originally negotiated, and I think it's very important that we have a revised figure to make sure that the resources are there to repave the impacted routes so that you all don't see any noticeable long-term damage on your streets after the project is done. So thank you to the residents and to the administration for really being vigilant on pushing for the increased repaving fee. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much, Counselor Sweeney. Counselor Houseman, I believe I saw your hand.
Yes, thank you. And on the, just parenthetically, I ran out of copies. The copy that's at Councilor Rotundo's desk maybe could be made available to the mayor so he can follow that when the time comes to take a look at the additional suggestions that I have. Thank you very much, Councilor Rand. Yeah, I would like to start by thanking my fellow councilors, the administration, and particularly my constituents who have done, with great deliberation, attention, and energy, yeoman's work in representing themselves and helping me represent them in this process. So I would echo the words of Councilor Rand and Councilor Sweeney in that regard. I want to, in my remarks, take a step back a little bit and say that it's important at the outset tonight to repeat what Councilor Rand and myself and Councilor President wrote in our letter to the Council on October 21st, that we are on record as is the Council in supporting ambitious clean energy goals to combat climate change, including the creation of a modern and resilient electrical grid. However, the National Grid project is today, as it has been, the source of much concern and many questions for Ward 4 residents and city residents. And tonight's meeting is the result of more than 9 months of intense attention and deliberation by the council and my constituents. I think it is time for the council to take a vote. We started this process primarily concerned with 2 issues, construction location and public health. Neither of these issues is really satisfied or resolved to my satisfaction, I think, nor to that of my constituents. But we have learned in this process that there are distinct limits to what the City Council can accomplish, and we must take a fork-in-the-road decision tonight to deny the application and be left to what little relief and leveraged state laws and agencies might avail us, or to exercise the maximum leverage we have been able to muster for the city's best interest by granting the application with conditions. I choose the second option as the better of 2 bad options. On the issue of public health, I think it's worth noting, if you'll indulge me, that the mayor's report for the city of Beverly in 1914 reports the following accomplishment: 84,324 gallons of light-grade oil was sprayed on 96 of our city streets to keep down the dust on our streets. To name a few streets, I won't belabor the point, but 96 streets is a lot. We're talking Cabot, Rantoul, Hale, Thorndike, Dodge, Haskell, Kernwood. All those streets were sprayed with oil because at that point, that was considered a best practice in the interest of public health. Today, needless to say, at a minimum, the city would be at least hauled into court for such conduct. But back then, it was an accepted practice and considered a good thing. I think I take that as a warning that we must be humble in the face of modern technology, for what we don't know may be more important than what we think we do know. One thing I do know is that we have experienced a public notice process from National Grid and the Siting Board that has been significantly flawed. And without repeating ad nauseum, as you've heard before, I'm going to still mention one particular example, and that is there was a legally required public hearing to get their permit that was held on December 11th, 2019 in Ward 4 at the Cove Community Center. Ward 4, as many of you know, is my ward, and National Grid was fully aware of that. I was not notified of that hearing, and the public who was notified was given a 2-week comment period, and the deadline for that comment period was December 27th, in the middle of the week between Christmas and New Year's Day. As I've said before, it's easy to think cynically that this notice and time frame was quite deliberately set to keep public knowledge and participation to an absolute minimum. So there is every reason for me and my constituents to be cynical and skeptical about the good faith of National Grid. In that regard, I will be interested to hear tonight what National Grid proposes to keep its corporate commitment to offset its carbon emissions from its construction project. They, on their website, say that they have a commitment to offset their construction projects' emissions, and so far what we've heard is that is considered by the representatives here as a matter of charity, for which perhaps a donation might be made, as opposed to something that they should do as a matter of course. I don't consider that acceptable. I call that greenwashing. And I do hope that National Grid will step up, for which I will congratulate them for keeping their public commitments. That said, I've tried to provide strong advocacy for my constituents, and I commit to represent them during, as Councilor Rand says, a very long process. You know, the hardest work may yet be still to come. But throughout the construction project, if the council approves the application this evening, I'll be representing my constituents as strongly as best as I can. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Councilor Houseman, and I do just want to note, did not escape my notice how much you really have come to love those books from the clerk's office. Applaud your citation of the 1914 report. Councilor St. Hilaire.
Thank you, Madam President. In one of our earlier meetings regarding this project, I made a comment that I wish we were having a different conversation. National Grid first presented to the council regarding this project in September of 2018, almost 4 years ago, and by the time and I know several of my colleagues even took office, the State Energy's Facility Siting Board had already approved the so-called preferred route. Additionally, the MOA between National Grid and the City of Beverly had already been signed, and that agreement outlined mitigation of impacts of construction of the project. Our own consultant, Mr. Miares, in our very first meeting with him, commented that the route decision had been made and that we should focus on attaching conditions. I wish we were in a different spot, but that's where we started. Regarding the concerns I've heard from residents, I'd like to make a few comments. First, on the EMF impacts. I completely appreciate and respect the fear and concern many residents have about EMF. I have a young family. I would have the same concerns that you have if this project was happening on my street. We've heard from EMF experts from both Grid and the city. And frankly, the lack of scientific agreement related to this correlation between cancer and EMF exposure doesn't make me feel any better, that's for sure. With that said, none of us on the council are experts on EMF, and I think we've heard from hired experts, and I think we have to rely on that expertise and guidelines that have been put in place by regulatory authorities and health organizations who are charged with monitoring this stuff. Doesn't make me feel any better, but I don't know how else we can proceed. Regarding route selection, the transmission line runs around the MBTA right away, as we all know currently, and I think it's been very reasonable for us to try to figure out how we can make that happen. As I stated previously, the board, the Energy Facility Siting Board, had already selected and concurred that this was the best route. And during this process, the city hired a consultant of our own to examine that process, and he concurred that the MBTA right away is not a viable option. I think it was an attractive alternative. I think it would have, for me, I would have felt better about having this off our city streets, but to me it's pretty clear at this point that that's not an option. Regarding the lack of communication, when I first served and ran for office, the big issue at the time was the Brimble Ave Whole Foods project, and the lack of public process and transparency around that project was a real problem back then, and sort of sad to see we're having the same problems all these years later. I would say for all of us, we need to do better. We talk about issues all the time. These are things that come before us that we need to be aware of that are going to impact the residents we serve. And just lastly, just thank you to the residents. Many of you have had to come out. We've had many, many, many meetings on this discussion. We've heard from numerous consultants, experts. You've been attending, several of you, every single meeting, sharing your concerns, frustrations along the way. Just want you to know we've been listening. I have, and I know my colleagues have as well. And keep showing up. Stuff works best when you're involved. So thank you. And regardless of the outcome, I know we'll stay focused on holding them accountable to whatever they agree to. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor St. Hilaire. Councilor Bowen, please.
Thank you. And going a little later in the line, I have the advantage now of of mostly just reiterating and thanking my colleagues for stating so clearly what I also feel, which is gratitude to everyone who's participated in the process and helped make it a better process from a really unfortunate and disappointing and frustrating starting point. And I recognize that we are still in a disappointing and frustrating place. And so I just want to add, beyond what's been said, my commitment to stay involved, to keep watching the project. I can see the route out of my apartment windows, so I will in fact be watching, literally and figuratively, and to work with you to ensure that we really do not only hold National Grid to the conditions we feel are necessary for the baseline of safety and protecting the public ways and our access to them, but also to hold us as a city government and the company to higher aspirations of how we can work together. So that's my commitment, and I think though none of us want to be in the position that we're in, we are. And so I also want to recognize, by taking a vote tonight, we take on a responsibility for seeing the project through if our vote is to approve it with conditions. And I don't take that lightly and want to be held accountable for my role in that. So thank you in advance for continuing to push us to do as much as we can. That's all.
Thank you, Councillor Bowen. Councillor Crowley.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, everybody. I have to echo everything else here that's being said here on the council, as far as really appreciate the community involvement, the togetherness as far as what we could do in this unfortunate situation. And again, all of us are committed as far as to stand by you as far as we go through the whole thing. But I guess mine is more directed to National Grid. You have told us that we're going to be getting a white glove treatment in the neighborhoods, and you're going to be keeping an eye on the neighbors and helping them out. The expectation is there, and I ask you to fulfill those obligations that have been set forward for us to make sure that this gets done safely with as little to zero disturbance for our neighbors and what's happening as far as out there goes. They're going to be going through enough as it is, because as big as this is going to be and as far as happening and the things that have gone wrong in the past with this whole situation, I think it's now time for you all to step up and be the partners that you keep telling us that you're going to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Crowley. Councillor Feldman.
Thank you, yes, and I echo all of the same sentiments my fellow councilors have already said and stated. And I really want to thank personally all of the constituents and everyone that's reached out. I have learned so much about this whole process. This was the first time in serving that there has been a grant of location of a project of even of this magnitude before us, that learned a lot of things along the way, but the biggest thing that I have learned and been heartened to see is that democracy really works best with more voices in the room, and the advocacy of neighbors for other neighbors and the sense of community that has really come out has made me so proud to serve the city of Beverly, because of the sense of community that all of the people in this room have for each other, and the pride that you have in your city and the care that you have for your neighbors. So I am genuinely appreciative of hearing from everyone and the care and concern and that you have shown throughout the process. And I also want to remain involved in terms of holding National Grid accountable for these conditions, and will continue to put in the work that's ahead that we have dedicated ourselves to as a council. And I would like everyone to continue to hold us accountable, and I have no doubt that with the amount of energy and brain power that the citizens of Beverly have brought to this project, that will be a problem. So I am looking forward to continuing to work with everyone in the room. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Feldman. Those who have been following this process with us have also perhaps learned about parliamentary procedure, that in the president's chair, you cannot opine on a matter before the council. I do intend to, when it's time for the vote, have Councillor Rand, in the absence of Councillor Rotundo, switch with me so that I can say something as well. But at this point, I will not and cannot. But I appreciate the opportunity to do so before the vote is taken. What I would like to do next, councilors, is first, I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Crowley. And while the mayor is coming to the podium, I think this is a good time for me just to acknowledge that also the mayor's constituent services director, Ronnie Jacobson, has joined us while we've been meeting so far. Thank you, Ms. Jacobson, for being here.
Thank you,
As well
Madam.
as, sorry, Mr. Mayor, I just noticed Ward 6 School Committee member Lorinda Visnick also joined us, and I am thrown off because she is in the back row, but on the wrong side of the, yes, I see someone has taken your seat. I understand. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam President. I just want to, there's a lot to echo here, but let me start, if I could, by saying I'm incredibly appreciative to Solicitor Williams and her team in the Solicitor's Office and our outside counsel in this matter. Also, like you, councils, want to thank all of our residents who stepped up and stepped in and really have flagged and raised and articulated a lot of concerns that that make a difference to hear, and your advocacy has made a real difference. To you, councilors, I always enjoy partnering with you, and this is one of the most important things we've been partnering on. And what I think is probably most important is to say that in ways both formal and informal, we will all be tracking this project and staying engaged in it. So I just want to make sure our neighbors know that. The folks at GRID, we work together with them and partner with them on things every day of the year. This has been a more challenging process for a lot of reasons, as we understand. And so if you folks end this meeting by voting to approve the grant of location, then that's when things start to move, and we all have to make good on the commitments that we're making, that GRID's making, that the conditions you've worked through will impose, and so I'm really appreciative of that. I will say on one specific condition that I think is one of the most important, not the only one, but certainly extremely important, and I'm grateful for how this one has been worked through, is we understand that when it comes to magnetic fields, that delta configuration is best practice, that it has a canceling out effect, and that the other important piece with that is a combination of depth and distance. So very important that that's in there in the conditions as it is, and we'll do our part to make sure collectively that that National Grid adheres to the plan, and that there's no straying from the plan unless it is absolutely necessary under the, as the condition reads. But again, thank you to everybody who's been putting so much effort into this, and grateful to everybody in the community who's participated. And we're all in this together for many more months, I would imagine. So, thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Houseman.
Yes, I am guessing, as you described how you want to move forward on going through the conditions, that may be the next step. I would like to ask your indulgence, because National Grid has really said they've taken it outside of permissible scope of conditions. The conversation about offsetting the carbon footprint emissions of this project, and just ask National Grid if they would go on record and say whether or not they have a proposal for us this evening, and whether they intend to come forward with a proposal in that regard.
Yes, and I'm going to ask National Grid to keep the scope very narrow and only respond to that question that Councillor Houseman's asking. So is there anyone from National Grid who wants to just respond as to whether there is a proposal about the green energy piece?
Is this with respect to the tree fund
Yes.
request? Yes, thank you. So I think as you heard from our stakeholder representative on Monday evening, the company is exploring the availability of programs that could contribute to such a tree fund. It is not something that we can fund through the project, as I think you've just indicated. So we are committed to doing that. We'll continue to do that, and we'll report back through the appropriate channels to the council. But that is very much something that we're pursuing, and we've heard the request, and we'll follow up.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Houseman. Thank you, Attorney Pizzi. Counselors, I would, as Counselor Houseman anticipated, like to, before we jump into making the amendments, it would be helpful to know what counselors may have come prepared with amendments on. So if you have come prepared with amendments on any conditions, if you could just indicate that, I'll call on you and let me know which numbered conditions, there are 33 total, you have come with an amendment on, and then we'll work our way through. Counselor Houseman, I do have in front of me that you have come prepared to amend condition 8, 10, 11, 13, and 30. So I'll make note of that. If other counselors had amendments on those same, I'd still like to hear that because it's helpful to know if there's more than one counselor with a thought. Counselors, are there any other counselors prepared to make an amendment to a condition this evening? And we also heard that Mr. Miaris has a suggestion on number 15. I have that on my list. Counselor Bowen.
Thank you. Condition 4, though it may require a quick question to Attorney Miaris. And same with condition 6. Those are more edit motions. Condition 12 and condition 21.
Thank you, Counselor Bowen. Counselor Rand, I saw your hand.
Thank you. Condition 11, 23, and 29.
Sorry, just jotting down who has which one. Sorry. And the other counselors who have come with amendments to propose this evening. Okay, thank you, counselors. Oh, Counselor Bowen.
Thanks. I have one other process question.
Yes.
Which is just to confirm whether the MOA amendments are now duly signed and executed.
Solicitor Williams, if you wouldn't mind just.
So as of the other night, I indicated that NEP had signed it, and the city is in the process of signing it. Whether the mayor has technically affixed his signature, I don't know. It's in our DocuSign system. So it's agreed upon.
Thank you. I ask because in the course of this process, anything that's not written down and signed feels very tenuous. So I just wanted to confirm, since that was a very important set of conditions that we have not included in this list because they were being amended in the MOA, I would like to know that that is fully signed and executed.
Solicitor Williams.
Well, I would say the important thing is that National Grid signed it. Okay.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam President. I believe I signed it several days ago, but I'm going to go look at my DocuSign and see that it's not in there. I'll be back in a couple minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So while the mayor's checking his DocuSign, let's go through the conditions in the order that counselors have come prepared to amend. So counselors, I will go to you. Think I have correctly recorded who has an amendment on which condition. I would ask that you pose, with the exception of Counselor Brown, I know you have a question, but if you have an amendment, please pose it in the form of a motion. If your motion gets a second, we can have discussion and then vote as to whether to include that amendment. And I think that will help us stay organized and on track. Counselor Bowen, if I was tracked, Mr. Miaris, sorry.
This process may go more smoothly if we put it up on the screen.
In that case, I don't disagree with you, but I would entertain a motion for a 5-minute screen setting up recess.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Take a 5-minute recess to get the screen up, and maybe also that will let the mayor check his DocuSign. the technology setup recess seems to have been effective, and counselors are back in their seats, so we'll resume where we paused, which was, Mr. Maris, did you have something else that you wanted to say before we?
No, I'm just here to, ready.
You're just
to-
ready, okay.
Ready.
That's very, very good, thank you for being at the ready. So I'm going to take us through in the order that I heard counselors say numerically what conditions they were interested in. I think I have correctly noted which counselor had which number. And as I said, counselors, if you would form your amendment in the form of a motion, and then if there's a second, we can discuss and then vote. And I assume Mr. Maris will jump in if there's a piece of legal advice that we are missing. So the first amendment that I heard was on condition 4. Counselor Bowen, that one was you.
Yes, thank you. And wanted to run the
Yes,
concept
please.
by Mr. Miaris first, which is just whether the last sentence should be removed based on other edits in this final-ish version. Whether that's now covered by the separate condition.
By condition 33, you're asking, Counselor Bowen?
Yes. Yes, I think that one was supposed to come out and didn't. So, yes, the idea was that we decided since that sentence was going to appear in so many places, we'd just make it an omnibus sentence and it should have come out. So, yes, we've now made the document 4 lines shorter.
So I would move that we strike the final sentence in condition 4. This condition is not intended, ...
So moved.
Second. Any discussion on this? All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Counselor Bowen, your next one on the list that I have is condition number 6.
Yes, thank you. And that similarly is a question about whether to edit the word memorandum in the second sentence to MOA for consistency.
Sure.
Then I would move that we replace the word memorandum in that second sentence of condition 6 to read MOA.
Second.
That was good. Counselor
All right,
Postman, thank
so
you. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you very much. Motion carries 980. There's 8 of us, sorry. Counselor Bowen, I believe, oh, I'm sorry, no. Counselor Houseman, numerically that brings us to you. Condition number 8, please.
Yes, so this relates specifically to the road and control plan. The mayor is not in the room, but I have had an opportunity to speak with him. I'm going to make a motion, read it out loud, but just preface the motion by saying that although he hasn't seen the specific language until he walked in this evening, the mayor has spoken both with staff and with a representative of the company in question here, and the mayor is in favor of incorporating language, whatever that ends up being, to implement the intention of this motion. So I will make a motion to insert the following language as before after section H and before the last paragraph of condition 8. NEP may contract with a vendor of its choice for a rodent control plan so long as that vendor deploys and uses only the anti-semic smart, quote unquote, technology to provide surface and subsurface rodent control. This requirement may be waived by the City Council in its sole and reasonable discretion upon an adequate showing by NEP of an undue practical hardship or other showing of lack of feasibility. Records shall be maintained and reports issued to the City Council and the City Department of Health of all work performed, equipment and material installed, and data generated during pre-construction and construction periods to a standard and procedure no less complete than the standards and procedures previously submitted and approved by the Director of the Department of Health. And if I may, Madam President, the plan that is referred to, or the standards that are referred to, are those in this document that was submitted and approved by Mr. Burke, the Health Department.
Thank you, Counselor Houseman. So we have a motion from Counselor Houseman. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion on this? Counselor Sweeney?
Thank you, Madam President. I would just like to ask if there's a representative from National Grid that can just confirm that you guys have no issues with the language as proposed by Councilor Houseman?
Attorney Pizzi, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Any other discussion on this?
I got something.
Oh, Mr. Miares.
I'm a little uncomfortable with referencing a technology that is a proprietary technology of an individual corporation. So I would suggest that after the word anti-CMEX smart, that you should insert the words or equivalent technology. We don't know how long anti-CMEX will continue to exist as an entity. Could be for decades, years, or it could be that they sell out to a bigger corporation in 3 months. So,
If I
Counselor
may.
Houseman?
Or its equivalent? Is that your suggestion, to insert or its equivalent?
or, well, I was going to say or equivalent technology, but you can say
equivalent
technology or its equivalent. Either one is fine.
My only concern is that the use of the word equivalent opens a door to somehow not use this proprietary program. I understand that to a degree is your point. But I also do not want to open the availability of that to not be used. If you'd give me just a moment.
While Counselor Houseman's thinking, I'm going to go to Counselor St. Hilaire. Counselor Houseman?
I think Mr. Miares is, yeah, I was thinking along the same lines, you know, what if a better technology came out tomorrow? Would we want to not allow the usage of, you know, I guess there is a provision here where we can waive this, but don't love the idea of endorsing a brand name.
Thank you, Counselor St. Hilaire. Counselor Feldman?
I tend to agree with Mr. Miares in that I had originally tried to do some of the work on this, but then lost some. I'm glad he took up the mantle on this condition, but there could be other technology out there, and as long as it is equivalent, I don't think that, to me, poses a problem as long as it is equivalent technology to the smart boxes.
Counselor Houseman, are you?
Yeah, no, if I may, I think that the reference to equivalent is acceptable. I'm wondering whether to reinforce the intent in the next line after the word "this requirement," how Mr. Miares would feel about this requirement may be enforced, or, and insert those words, so that it would read this requirement may be enforced or may be waived by the city council in its sole and reasonable discretion, thereby giving the council a little bit more oversight over the choice.
Okay, so generally speaking, I don't think it's a good idea for the council to get involved in enforcement. I think the correct entity for engaging in enforcement is the director of the Department of Health. So if you want to say this requirement may be enforced by the director of the Department of Health, I think that would be all right. The waiver by the city council is currently written as upon an adequate showing, so that seems like if you want to say something about enforcement, it should be in a separate sentence, not in that sentence.
I would be fine with this requirement may be enforced by the Director of Public Health as a separate sentence, and as well as accepting your suggestion or equivalent.
Okay.
Thank you, Counselor Houseman. Counselor Bowen?
That-
Sure, yes, I think I still, I think it's an additional comment at this point. I was also thinking of adding something to the effect of, or its equivalent, and wonder if, rather than stating enforcement by the Director of the Department of Health, stating that the Director of the Department of Health is the judge of the sufficiency of that technology. Because my discomfort is with essentially the council in these conditions directing funds to a particular company that we haven't vetted or bid out. It's my same concern about hiring a consultant for a multi-$100,000 contract without bidding it out. Same principles apply, so I wouldn't want us to be that limiting, but ensuring that our health department has a say in getting the high-quality, real-time data that a system like this provides, I'm fully in support of, so.
Thank you, Counselor Bowen. Counselor Houseman.
If I may, yeah, we're not the ones selecting the vendor. The language is explicit that the National Grid selects the vendor. We're only talking about the approach that's used by the vendor. So we're not involved in that contract. Part of the reason it's worded this way is that, with all due respect to Mr. Burke, he hasn't been as engaged, I believe, and I wish the mayor were here. Perhaps can see us on the TV screen in his office. It'd be helpful to, so he has done some vetting with his chief of staff and with Mr. Burke and himself, talking with representatives who use this technology. So it has gone through a vetting process. Otherwise, I wouldn't be comfortable myself sort of suggesting that it be used. So I would rather not leave the decision up to Mr. Burke, at least not solely.
It seems like the changes having been incorporated. Counselor Houseman, I'll let you read this over. This was your amendment. And then I think we're in a position to vote on this one.
I don't see language up there that addresses Counselor Bowen's specific point, unless I'm missing it. Madam President, if I may, through you to Brian?
Yes.
Is there a phrase in there that attempts to be responsive to Councilor Bowen's comment about the Director of Health? Or? Okay. So. I didn't want to write something you didn't want. Okay. If I may, the mayor is back into the room, and perhaps some clarification would be helpful for him.
If it's okay, I'm going to go to the mayor in a second, but I would find it helpful if we could get this finished, and I think Councilor Bowen's about to say her language suggestion, and then I'd be happy to go to the mayor.
I was actually going to say I'm comfortable with this language. My suggestion was to address Councilor Houseman's desire for some enforcement mechanism and a way to do that, but I'm comfortable with it as is.
Thank you. That's helpful, Councilor Bowen. Mr. Mayor, the question, I believe, to you was just around the vetting that you and your staff may have already done around the smart box technology or its equivalent, and if that's something that you have already been studying or beginning to look into. I think if you don't mind commenting on that for us. Thank you.
Thanks, Madam President. So as Councilor Houseman was referring to, and he and I were able to touch base earlier, I was able to speak with the representative from the Smart Box, Smart Pipe company. Those are the two products. And they, in talking through the project and the manholes and the trenching and the dynamic and the type of construction, they believe that those types of products can work well here. In talking with our health director, Mr. Burke, earlier today, he expects that it would not be problematic for the city working with Grid to kind of consider that integrated pest management plan really kind of a living document and be able to, to try some of these technologies that we believe could work better than the traditional baiting of boxes. So is that helpful to the conversation?
Councilor Houseman?
Yeah, I believe so. I'd also point out that I specifically built in language that basically says if there's a showing that's of undue hardship or some, lack of feasibility, the council has the ability to, by these terms, to waive this. So there's always a default back to a more, the sort of more traditional approach to debating and integrated pest management.
Councilor Bowen?
Thank you, and it may go slightly separate, but I did have another slight potential edit, just that NEP may contract with the vendor of its choice for implementation of its rodent control plan. I know the rodent control plan is listed in the same condition, but since the plan has already been submitted and reviewed and accepted, I think what we're discussing is who they hire to implement that plan.
Well, the vendor is their choice. The technology essentially is our choice, if you will. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
We're
but
not dictating who they hire.
Agreed. Though I think it's also important that we not dictate the specific company that provides the technology. So that edit, I think, is good. But they're not contracting with a vendor to create a rodent control plan or amend a rodent control plan. They're contracting with a vendor to implement a rodent control.
Right, so the last part of the language talks about the same standards and procedures as in the current plan.
I think it's just if I may, it's a word edit, I think. So instead of saying contract for a rodent control plan, Councilor Bowen is suggesting for implementation of its rodent control plan.
Yeah, I have no problem with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
May I ask a question about your amendment? I wonder about, I think this is sort of brushing against what you were both mentioning, Councilors Houseman and Bowen, but I wonder about or equivalent technology as determined by the director of the Department of Health. I wonder if that's what we were getting at, is who determines if it's equivalent technology without determining that it has to be that branded technology?
Yeah, that's fine.
Or is determined by the city?
But if I may,
I mean,
Councilor Feldman.
it does.
I would say possibly if by the city of Beverly, only because I know that the chief of Ms. Ruel Kersker has done the lion's share of the research in this technology, and it's possible that there is somebody better situated in the city to
I think that's
speak to the clarity of that. Okay.
I think that's good.
Keeps us open to whomever.
all right, friends.
So I would like to make a motion that we insert, as stated, the language as appears on this screen here, that reflects the initial motion plus all of the various edits as discussed.
Thank you, Councilor Houseman.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So that one carries 7-1. That brings us to Councilor Houseman. It's yours again, I think, in numeric order. Condition number 10.
Yeah, this is more along the lines of Councilor Bowen's suggestions about sort of cleaning up drafting. So it's a very awkward, long phrase to repeat, as occasionally does occur. Quote, the N192 Replacement Project Citizens Advisory Committee. And so my suggestion is we simply make that a defined term and call it committee after the statement of the whole multiple words. And that thereafter, as there are references made to that committee, we simply use the defined term committee as opposed to repeating the whole thing. That is my motion.
Is there a second? Any discussion on that? All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 8-0 on that. Thank you. The next one we have is condition 11. Counselor Rand and Counselor Houseman, you each indicated that you have an amendment to this. Counselor Rand, would you like to go first?
Thank you. Yes, let's see. Would like to motion to add, to include "and by email wherever possible" in the sentence. Before conducting each video sweep, NEP shall provide notice by mail. So to add there, "and by email wherever possible" to property owners and residents.
Is that your motion?
That's my motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on this one? Counselor Houseman.
Yeah, could you just clarify where that would be inserted? I was unfortunately looking at the wrong condition, so I missed
That's
where.
okay. Condition 11.
Yep,
Towards the bottom of the condition, it says, "Before conducting each video sweep,
okay.
NEP shall provide notice by mail and by email wherever possible." I'd love to hear from Mr. Miaris about this, too.
Mr. Miaris.
That's a possible.
Well, lawyers will never like to see possible as a standard because lots of things are possible, but so
Practical.
I would suggest that instead of using the word possible, you use the word reasonably practical.
I should know that phrase by now. Okay. Can I? Oh, sorry.
You want to amend your
Council
motion?
President, may I amend my motion?
You may.
Okay, I would like to amend my motion to, in condition 11, to add "and by email wherever practically reasonable."
Or reasonably practical?
Reasonably practical, sorry.
Play on words.
Same thing.
Thank you, Counselor Rand. Is there a
Reasonably practical.
second to this amended?
Second.
Great, thank you. Lots of seconds on that one. Discussion, I saw Counselor Bowen and some hands down here.
Yes, just a quick legal terminology question. Should that phrase be set off in commas so that the reasonably practical doesn't apply to the mail, which is required?
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yes.
So I would suggest that you say "and, comma, wherever reasonably practicable, comma, by email." Okay.
Counselor Rand, would you like to amend your motion?
I would like to amend my motion for the better, and this is why group editing is really fun. So, in the line "before conducting each video sweep," I'd like to include, let's see if I can get this right.
It's behind
It's
you if that
behind,
helps.
it's over your
Oh,
shoulder.
it's right there, oh, good. And wherever reasonably practicable, by email.
Is there a second on the amended?
Second.
I can't see, is there a comma after practicable?
Yeah.
There is now. Okay.
All right, we've got a motion, an amended motion and a second. Discussion, is there discussion down here? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, carries 8-0. Thank you, Counselor Rand. That was Counselor Rand's amendment to condition 11. Counselor Houseman, you also had an amendment.
Yes. So I'll put it in the form of a motion, and then we can discuss
Thank you.
the language. So let me just find my place. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the sixth line down, I'd like to amend the sentence that starts "NEP shall provide the commissioner," so that it reads, "NEP shall provide the commissioner, comma, the city council, comma, and the committee reasonable advance notice of the sweep."
Did you want to handle, did you want to handle your two changes?
Yeah, I can do that as well.
We can do them together if you want.
Well, okay.
It's up to you.
Yeah, no, I think it's better if they're two separate motions.
So we have a motion from Counselor Houseman to insert the city council and the committee. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on this one? All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. That motion carries 8-0.
And then, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, the seventh line down, insert the words, "and shall allow one or more members of the city council and the committee as determined by council president." That would be the inserted language, so that it reads, "NEP shall provide," oops, I'm sorry, wrong line.
I couldn't find it.
So that it reads, shall provide advance notice of the sweep and shall allow one or more city officials, comma, as designated by, excuse me, if he so chooses, and shall allow one or more members of the city council and the committee as determined by the city council president to observe both video sweeps.
Second?
I was only pausing. I'm sorry, I was pausing. I think we're not quite there.
That's why I gave a cheat sheet to help.
I was going to say the commissioner, if he so chooses, looks like it's in.
It is.
But thank you, Counselor Rand. You were right on it with the second. I will come back to you in a moment. Thank you. You were ready. Oh, Mr. Mayor? Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's a good edit. I think the mayor is suggesting.
The language here won't need that. Commissioner, if he so chooses. As determined by the.
Counselor Bowen is right. Well, I think when we get this right on the screen, actually, but Mr. Mayor, I appreciated that you were watching that pronoun. But Counselor Bowen, you are correct. I think when we get the words in the right order.
If we get there, yeah.
Okay, so
That's why I'm breaking.
insert and shall allow
Counselor
one or
Houseman.
more member of the city
So-
council.
Yeah, members
Well,
of the city
they're
council.
still working on the editing on the screen.
Yes.
But it's
Determined by the city
the
council.
last, if he so chooses, should be removed. There we go.
Well, it went back up to where it was originally.
Yeah, and that would be appropriate.
Yep.
There we go.
Yes.
Took a minute.
Thank you, Mr. Bertram. Counselor Houseman, I'll give you a minute to make sure that reflects your edit before I ask for a second. I'll let you phrase the motion.
Yes. If you accept the duty.
Yes. So this, okay, so we have a motion from Counselor Houseman to amend it as shown. Counselor Rand, do you want to come back with that second?
Second, yes.
Is there any discussion on this? Counselor St. Hilaire.
Just wanted to point out the pronoun, if he so chooses. I think we had intended to make that if they choose.
Gender neutral.
I also had a question.
Can
No.
I ask a, clarification? Is the intention of this to allow the commissioner to select some city officials to participate and for the council president to select some councilors or committee members to
Yes,
participate?
that is correct.
So two decision makers.
Yes, that
and
is
two
correct.
potential groups of participants.
Yeah, so it shouldn't be they, it should be he, as long as the commissioner, or
No,
restate the word
Brian
commissioner.
just solved that problem for you.
Yes, I think Brian did solve that.
Yep.
Counselor St. Hilaire, the floor is still
Yeah, I had a
yours.
further question. I guess for National Grid, what is involved in a video sweep, and is it practical for these folks to observe the process?
Is there a member? Thank you, Mr. O'Leary.
Thank you, Madam President. It is quite the process. We had folks that can join us, absolutely. Do I need it to, we're gonna have to work through all the safety requirements, possibly get a police detail with us. It's similar to some of the walk that we did in one of the wards back. So it is possible. With more people, it does provide a little bit more challenges. But we welcome folks to be able to join.
Thank you, Mr. O'Leary. Thank you, Counselor St. Hilaire. Counselor Houseman.
Well, yeah, no, I was just going to say, it was not my intention that it would be a large group of people, probably just maybe one representative for the council, one for the committee, but again, that's your discretion and judgment, and I'm sure you'll be able to communicate with the people on the logistics of what makes sense.
Yes, thank you. And it does sound like it's possible, so it seems like we can. We have a motion from Counselor Houseman. We have a second from Counselor Rand. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 8-0 on this amendment. And that brings us in numeric order. Counselor Vaughn, back to you. You had indicated an amendment to condition 12.
Yes. So I would move that we amend the first sentence of condition 12 so that it reads, NEP shall submit a written electromagnetic field EMF measurement plan to be reviewed and approved by the commissioner prior to commencing construction on the project.
So we have a motion from Counselor Bowen. Is there a second?
Second for discussion?
Thank you, Counselor Houseman. Is there discussion?
I would, if
Counselor Bowen.
through you, Council President, invite our attorneys to advise on whether there are any problems with that. My intent is to mirror some of the other conditions that we have that sort of speak to the timing and staging of things. And given that this condition requires some measurement before the work is done, it doesn't seem problematic, but I would appreciate an additional opinion on that.
Thank you, Counselor Bowen. Mr. Miyares. Counselor Bowen would appreciate your opinion on that.
My opinion is that the language that has been proposed here is satisfactory, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Miyares. Thank you, Counselor Bowen. Is there further discussion on this motion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 8-0. Counselor Houseman, that brings us back over to you for condition 13.
Yes, so the MOA and the amendment to the MOA do not set forth in any place the three streets in the city that run through Ward 4. Now, I recognize that National Grid has acknowledged that, that's part of what they would pay for, and that Commissioner Collins has indicated that to me verbally that, and I think others perhaps as well, it was simply a Scrivener's error. Nevertheless, we still have absolutely nothing in writing at any place in the MOA, the conditions, or the amendment to the MOA, which actually lists the streets in Ward 4 that are the subject of reconstruction after the project is done. And I would appreciate my colleagues' support that somewhere in all of these documents, we're not limited in, because we're simply saying including but not limited to, that actually the streets of Ward 4 are included as contemplated in this project for reconstruction afterwards.
We have a motion from Counselor Houseman. Is there a second for discussion? I see the attorneys are waiting. Second for discussion. Thank you. Mr. Miyares and perhaps Solicitor Williams, I see you also have gone to the podium.
So my comment really just goes to the sort of strangeness of that provision, which is it specifically calls out 3 streets. My understanding is that there are, in fact, 12 streets that will need to be restored. And I would suggest you would get the same impact if you listed all 12, and it wouldn't appear, it wouldn't create a question in the reader's mind, why are these here and the others are not? So, to my way of thinking, if you're going to start listing streets, you should just, there's only 12, so it can be done, just list them. That would be my opinion.
Solicitor Williams, and then Counselor Houseman will go to you.
Sure, and with respect to the MOA, I know I heard a conversation a while back between Attorney Riley and Counselor Houseman about this, and Counselor Houseman and I both, I've emailed him about this in March. The MOA, paragraph 10, actually states that NEP agreed that streets excavated in support of the installation of the cable and removal of the N192 cable shall be repaved, curb to center line, and then it goes on. Then it says later, except that NEP agreed to repave curb to curb a certain list of streets. That's Exhibit A. So the streets in Exhibit A are not an exhaustive list of the streets. Those were the streets that if Grid was actually going to do the repaving, we got them to agree to do those curb to curb. So from my opinion, my perspective, this was not a scrivener's error. The MOA said they have to repave everything. And then the limited list in the MOA was what they agreed to repave curb to curb. So just to the point of there was a scrivener's error, there wasn't. And I do believe that the MOA requires them to be responsible for paying for or restoring all the streets that are the subject matter of the path.
Thank you, Solicitor Williams. Counselor Houseman.
If I may. Solicitor Williams, the MOA that was signed, did that go through your office, and was that part of, was the drafting of it done by your office in part?
Yes, it was.
Commissioner Collins and Attorney Riley both indicated to me that it was nothing more than a scrivener's error.
Well,
and what you've just suggested would tend to suggest that the streets in Ward 4 would not be complete streets as they're reconstructed.
Yep. So what I said is that Grid agreed to repave all the streets that are impacted by the construction, which is all the streets, all 12 of them, the entire route. The MOA called out a list of streets that they agreed to pave curb to curb. I don't know what Commissioner Collins told you. I don't know what Attorney Riley told you. I recall being part of drafting this, and I'm just telling you it wasn't a scrivener's error. You may not like the way it's drafted, but that was the intent of it, and that's how it's written.
Mr. Mayor, it looks like you would like to say something.
I just want to take it a step further. We fought with Grid over this quite a bit. They didn't want to pave anything curb to curb. This is a part of it, so that language is all there, but this is also part of why we're taking the check to pave everything curb to curb. Okay? So just, I don't want anybody worrying that their street's not going to get restored curb to curb, because everybody will.
Okay. With that commitment from you, that the streets in Ward 4 will also get complete streets curb to curb.
The ones you named, not every street.
Well,
our hope is, and you know this, that
Sorry,
the whole of the route will be repaved curb to curb, and we'll be able to do some of the adjoining streets that are going to be, bearing detour traffic, et cetera. But, we'll see how far the money all goes at the end of the day. But yes, the plan is that the whole length of the route itself will be restored curb to curb.
so the streets in Ward 4 will not necessarily receive the same treatment as the other streets that go through the reconstruction?
I'm not sure I'm following you. I just said that the whole route is going to get.
So long as we don't run out of money, I think is what I heard you say.
No.
I'm sorry, Madam President.
No, I mean, if we run out of money, we'll use other money. We'll use Chapter 90 or other local money to make sure that the whole of the route is restored curb to curb. Our hope has been that we'll be able to do the whole of the route and some adjacent streets that we recognize are going to see additional traffic via detours, et cetera. But at a minimum, we're going to do the whole of the route curb to curb.
Okay. I'm willing to accept the mayor's public statement and commitment that that's what's going to happen in Ward 4, although I'm not pleased with the way that we're not listing it, but I accept that, and so I would not push the issue.
Thank you, Counselor Houseman. And I did notice that you tried to slip in there that all the streets in Ward 4 would get curbed. All of Ward 4. That was almost a bold and brave moment. Counselor Sweeney.
Thank you, Madam President. I think we've already addressed this, but just to be abundantly clear for the folks in the audience as well, rereading the MOA, and this may be a question for Commissioner Collins, so I understand if you don't have the answer. it appears that the agreement is the now $3.25 million figure would be used by the city to repave the impacted roads within 18 months of the completion of the project, and only if the city does not repave the roads on the impacted route within that 18-month period, then the list that Councilor Houseman refers to in Exhibit A would come into effect as to the specifics for which roads, curb to curb or partially National Grid would need to repave. Is there any chance that we would, as a city, go beyond 18 months? I know obviously there's factors that might be at play, or is that a pretty long buffer so that we can confidently feel that the city's going to repave?
We were confident enough to sign the MOA, and we continue to be, and as best I understand it, we're not going to need to wait till the end of the project to begin the process of the repaving. We're going to follow follow their work.
Okay, that's helpful clarification. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Sweeney. Counselor Bowen.
Thank you. And recognizing that this is sort of the backup plan, we did discuss this in multiple meetings, and we have them recorded, and it was stated by the attorney for National Grid that it was simply a scrivener's error and could be corrected.
Yes.
So while it seems like there is a lot of confusion around this, I see no harm in adding that to the condition based on those statements, and especially, I don't know why that statement would have been made and not corrected before tonight if it was incorrect. So given, I think the first time the statement was made, Attorney Riley said he believed it was a scrivener's error, might need to look into it and would let us know, and he did not, as far as I'm aware, so.
Yeah. And if I may, Commissioner Collins here in these chambers did say it was an oversight, as far as he knew, so.
So given that, is there a reason not to, as Mr. Miari suggested, list all the impacted streets?
There is none.
Including the ones that you've listed?
Yes, that's correct.
Attorney Pizzi, for our information.
Thank you. So I obviously wasn't at the meetings that you're referring to, where obviously Attorney Riley spoke to this issue, but in reading the memorandum of agreement, I read it the same way as does Solicitor Williams. So I'm concerned about adding all of the streets when the language of the MOA seems to clearly state that that the company agrees to pave all of the impacted streets, or to restore curb to center line. However, and then there's a subset of streets listed in Exhibit A that it would agree to repave curb to curb. And the language that's being added here in condition 13 seems to contradict that.
Do you want me to read in my email? Excuse me, Madam President.
Solicitor Williams, please.
So I think ultimately the discussion is somewhat meaningless, given that the city has committed to repave curb to curb along the entire route. But I did email Mark Riley about this issue, if you'd like me to read what our exchange was recently about it. If you don't want to hear it, that's fine.
Yes, please.
Sure. Okay. So the first part of my email is about the increasing the payment for the repaving and the engineering consultant. And then I said, additionally, I believe that you and Councilor Houseman had an exchange at one of the meetings about updating the list of streets identified in Exhibit A to the MOA. It is not clear to me whether that is something NEP is willing to do. Could you please clarify? And then he, in his email back to me, he said, as to Exhibit A, which is the MOA and with streets listed. If you recall, during the negotiations, we said that NEP, if NEP had to do the paving itself, then it would pave curb to crown, unless the disturbance was on both sides of the streets. And then he cites a case. That remains NEP's position. I'm not sure Councilor Houseman appreciates the Exhibit A is meaningless if the city repaves, which it intends to do.
Councilor St. Hilaire.
So it strikes me that this discussion on paving curb to curb was a negotiation. The mayor made it clear that it was a hard-fought negotiation, And the mayor's also made clear that he fully intends to pave all of the streets curb to curb. With that said, I don't know that we need to include this language. I don't know it's our place to have that negotiation beyond what the mayor already agreed to. I guess we are having that negotiation, but, it seems like the commitment from the mayor to pave all these streets, to me, is what matters most to the residents.
Thank you, Counselor St. Hilaire. Counselor Houseman.
No, I'm willing to listen. I mean, I'm happy to have all 12 streets listed. I did hear the mayor's commitment. I agree with Counselor Sweeney that the issue of, what happens if we can't do it. I mean, as we have learned, unexpected things can happen in this world. So personally, I'd feel more comfortable if all 12 are there. But I do take Counselor, my colleague's comment that the mayor's made a commitment. So Counselor St. Hilaire's, so I'm willing to listen. I could really go either way. I have a preference, but I'm not going to push it, depending on, it's really the will of the council at this point.
Counselor Sweeney, I think I saw your hand.
Thank you, Madam President. I don't want to be redundant, so I'll just quickly state, in rereading the Section 10 of the MOA and in hearing both statement from the city solicitor and the mayor, especially the statement from the mayor that repaving can continue throughout the project, it seems as though it would be very unlikely that we would need to rely on the procedure outlined in Exhibit A, and given the pushback from both the Attorney President, I'm sorry, I forgot your name, and Attorney Riley, I think we would be best to leave the language as it is. And then to Councilor Houseman's point, obviously this is a commitment made by the mayor and his administration, and certainly should be something that when that stage of the project comes to fruition, the council is diligent in working with Commissioner Collins and others to ensure that the work is completed on time.
Thank you, Counselor Sweeney. Counselor Feldman.
Yes, thank you. As long as the revised figures that we've received from that have been agreed to in terms of the rehabilitation of the streets are correct, and that the city is receiving that check up front for the ball to be in our court, these conditions are conditions that we're placing on NEP, not the city. So if we have the check, it's conditions with the city of Beverly. If they've already paid for that inclusive list of streets and all of those streets to be repaved. So I feel like this is a moot point because the condition is not, they've paid, that it's really just NEP shall pay for the restoration of all public ways impacted by the project, because we are receiving the money up front and the onus is on the city of Beverly to live up to the conditions that we are setting as a city. So I feel like it's a moot point to include any streets at this point.
Counselor St. Hilaire.
So I have an idea. What if we left it as is, NEP shall pay for the restoration of the public ways impacted by the project in accordance with the MOA, and perhaps add a second line stating East Lothrop, Cross Lane, and Boyles shall be paved curb to curb by the city, or something like that, if we wanted to get that in writing. I don't know how Mr. Miaris would feel about that, or if that's a bad idea.
Mr. Miaris, I guess it's
Well,
been
again-
asked how you would feel about that.
I have two problems. Problem one is we're issuing here a grant of location to NEP, and we've been trying to diligently avoid placing requirements on the executive branch or the city. So that's point number one. Point number two is the one I made right at the beginning. If you call out 3 streets, it's reasonable to infer that the other 9 streets were left out for a reason. And if we get into a dispute over what it means, the fact that the other 9 streets aren't there is, to my way of thinking, a problem. So, if you feel you must name those 3 streets, then I think it's only prudent to name the other 9 as well. I don't want the language, however, to say that the city's going to do it or that the executive branch is going to do it.
Counselor St. Hilaire.
What if we were to say all streets affected by the project will be repaved curb to curb? It
Well-
says, it'll say NEP shall pay for the restoration outlined in the MOA, period. Second sentence, all streets affected by the project will be repaved.
Then we run into the case law, which clearly says that the obligation of the utility in a grant of location is to pave from curb to crown. And so if we're really much better off simply saying they'll pay for it as they have promised to do under the MOA.
Counselor Rand.
Thank you. Given this discussion, I feel pretty clear that the language that's there is the most concise and correct language. I think it's really important to make the distinction that the city has made a commitment to pave curb to curb those streets in Ward 4, and I think saying anything more than that here actually goes against what the MOA has laid out and has been agreed upon. So I mean, I don't think we can change that language in a way that's legally sound. That's what I'm gathering from the information we've just received.
Thank you, Counselor Rand. Counselor Houseman.
So, hearing from Attorney Mariores and the collected comments, including the comment that Councilor Rand just made, I'm going to withdraw my motion, but I will point out that all of us elected officials, including those who have made commitments here, are subject to a term of office. And so we are left with, without the streets of Ward 4 listed somewhere, and I'm open to where they might be listed, that commits to a complete streets restoration, I still find myself, not that I doubt the commitment of the mayor and the word of the mayor at all, not a bit. I still find myself in a situation where, for me and my constituents of Ward 4, there's a certain problematic nature to how this is laid out if we leave the language without any amendment to it.
Thank you, Counselor Houseman. Counselor St. Hilaire.
I would echo that concern, and some of these residents are now in Ward 6, as you may know, Councilor Houseman, so I have some skin in the game here too, and I totally agree that, we've been fortunate to have, long tenured mayor, et cetera, but, 2 years, who knows what's gonna happen. The commitment is great verbally, but is there a way to document in this somewhere that everybody will get their road repaved? I don't know where that could be, and I understand that this is a grant of location for National Grid, but to your first point, Mr. Miyares, I would love to hold the executive branch accountable on this point.
Thank you, Counselor St. Hilaire. Counselor Bowen.
Thank you, and I agree, it does sound like it's near or actually impossible to craft language that addresses this point in our grant of location conditions. But just as a point on process, I think we recognize the difference between the mayor's role in negotiating the MOA and the council's role in conducting public hearings and gathering information about what conditions are needed. And if we received incorrect information in those public hearings, or further negotiations took place that weren't shared with us, that are necessary for us to know what conditions we need to add, that's a new flaw in an already flawed process to be hearing about tonight. So while we may not be able to remedy it right now, I think that's a serious breach of any trust we have in this process, and so makes me even more uncomfortable with assurances about how our streets, including the ones we're on right now and that this important city infrastructure is on are going to be restored appropriately.
Councillor Rand.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Councillor.
So I just want to make it really clear because I know if I was following along, I might feel a little bit confused. The condition requires that NEP will pave all of the streets or pay for the restoration of all of the streets. So it's not, this condition is not leaving out any streets, saying it will pay for all public ways. So I think if we want to list every street, and that would bring a sense of kind of assurance that the Ward 4 and some Ward 6 streets are included in that. I think we can do that here, but it still is, the problem remains that we're relying on a commitment not from NEP, but from the administration to pave those streets curb to curb. So I think that's a separate problem at this point. That's my interpretation of it, but I would be more than willing to just list all 12 streets here so that we're making it very clear our expectation that those are all being considered for repaving or restoration.
Thank you, Councillor Rand.
Thank you.
I feel like we're starting to go in a bit of a circle. I'd like to see if we can move forward on this. It seems to me the council largely seems to have agreement that listing all 12 streets would give assurance and also does not seem to be harmful. Mr. Miaris, also, you advised us that listing all 12 was better than calling out 3. Councillor Crowley, you have been waiting, so I don't want to cut you off.
I was just going to say the same thing.
Okay.
If the simplest thing to move this on and go through and to make sure everybody has what they're looking for is, like Mr. Miaris had talked about, then you know, I say we just list all 12 streets.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you. I agree. I think that's the direction to go, but I think to just clarify further, the appendix that applies in the case that the city does not complete the repaving in the specified time wouldn't be there if it were actually meaningless. So it is there as a backup plan that we may need to enforce, and it would limit the curb-to-curb paving to just 6 streets. So that is what the MOA currently says, has not been amended, and we would not be adding anything on top of that to the conditions as is. And so, again, it sounds like we cannot address that here, and hopefully it's a moot point because the paving gets done curb to curb within those 18 months. But just want to be really clear that is a slight difference.
I see some hands over here. I'm going to really limit us if we start to circle around. So if this is a new addition, Councillor Feldman and Councillor Houseman.
I have one question for Mr. Miaris.
Please.
I do not want to weaken the first part of this because so does the addition of the 12 streets weaken the all public ways impacted sentiment? Because if there's streets that are heavily detoured as part of this that aren't part of the project paving, I don't want to detract from something that's not on that list of 12 streets that ends up being heavily impacted in a way that we weren't anticipating. So do you see the addition of pulling out specific streets as weakening our overall statement of anything impacted?
Thank you, Councillor Feldman. Councillor Miaris, that's a question to you, if you would.
That would be Councillor SEL. No, I think because it says including but not limited to, and it's clear that the 12, and I hope somebody's got the list of 12 so we can insert it tonight.
I believe Solicitor Williams has the list.
That those are the ones that we know out of the box are going to be impacted. And I think the suggestion of saying all public ways impacted is because we acknowledge that side streets may end up getting impacted in a way that we can't know for sure until it happens. So I think the language, but not limited to, makes the point that other streets may end up having to be restored as well. So,
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Solicitor Williams, please.
That was my question.
I know you would like to move on. I do want to just say something, because I heard a comment earlier from Councilor Bowen, and I'm not really quite sure what she was implying. But the only negotiations that the administration has had with GRID since it signed the original MOA is with respect to increasing payments for repaving, the engineering consultant, and police patrols. And there was also an effort made to get GRID to agree to delta configuration and to installation of the cable line at least 30 inches deep. I have not been involved in any other negotiations or renegotiation of the MOA, and so I just want people in the room to know that there haven't been other discussions that I'm aware of.
Thank you, Solicitor. Councilor Bowen.
Thanks. Just to clarify, maybe negotiation was not the right word. I was referring to the email exchange that you just read to us that was about a topic we had asked Attorney Riley about and got one answer. And then it appears that you followed up and got a different answer, but we never received that different answer until tonight. That's what I was referring to. So not intending to imply anything, just repeating that back.
Solicitor.
That's fine, if that's your perception of things.
Attorney Pizzi.
Thank you, and not to belabor this discussion, I think the statement that you're referring to, I believe was made at the last hearing that perhaps Attorney Riley was at, and we certainly would have, he hasn't been here, obviously, to speak for himself, but, and I suspect was a statement he made without then having been able to go back and look at the agreement as he's now done and communicated with Solicitor Williams. I just want to point out that with respect to Condition 13, I think the reference to MOA, at least in my view, was intended, the MOA speaks for itself, and is the complete agreement with respect to street restoration. I'm concerned that by including but not limited to, we're implying that there is paving to be done or restoration to be done other than the streets that are discussed in the MOA. I think what the agreement was that National Grid would agree to restore the streets impacted. When we say impacted by the project in accordance with the MOA, those are the streets on the project route. And there's a listing of, some of those streets are curb to crown, some of those streets would have been, if we had done the paving, curb to curb. But again, I think as has been mentioned, since the city is going to be undertaking that effort, we have reimbursed for that cost. But including but not limited to, I would have strong objection to that language because that would potentially expand the scope of what was agreed to in the MOA.
So, Mr. Miyares, I'm going to go to you. The last piece of the comment notwithstanding, or I guess withstanding. Listing the 12 streets so that there can be some assurance for residents. Is it still your counsel that there's no harm in doing that? Because it feels like the council of a different type of council, different spelling, has a sense of agreement that if that's a way to provide assurance to residents, that there's agreement that that would be the way to go. Or I perceive that there's some agreement.
So, NEP's obligation, legal obligation, ignore the MOA for the moment. The obligation is to restore any public way that is impacted by the project, whether it's on the project route or adjacent to the project route or whatever, if they, you know, if they cause damage to a side street while they're working on an intersection, their obligation is to restore it. Their obligation is not to restore it curb to curb, however. Their obligation is to restore it essentially curb to crown. Okay. The MOA says you can do that, or you can cut the city a check, and the city will use the money to restore the streets itself. And you've heard the mayor say that if the city does it, they'll do it curb to curb. So, one of my mentors when I was a young lawyer said, when you're drafting something, if you don't know what to say nothing. So my inclination would be to stop at MOA period. I don't think it is likely that including the list of all 12 is in fact harmful, but I also don't think it's helpful. And so if I were the decision maker, I'd stop at MOA period. If you feel as though it's an important thing to list the 12, I think it's fine, you can do that. It's just wouldn't be my preference.
Thank you, Mr. Maris. Councilor Sweeney.
Thank you, Madam President. I, in short, believe that the council should take the advice of Attorney Miyares in this vote and leave the condition as it reads currently. I just want to clarify, after rereading Section 10, please, Attorney Miyares, correct me if I'm wrong. It is my understanding that Section 10A does not give National Grid the choice as to whether they would like to pave the streets themselves or whether they would prefer to cut the city a $3.25 million check. I believe that the city has made clear that we would like the check and to do the work ourselves, and only if the work is not completed in a timely fashion, as outlined in subsection D, that National Grid would in fact take on any of the repaving responsibility themselves.
Yeah,
That-
you're right.
Okay, just want to clarify that for the residents. And
You're right.
to con-
I misspoke because I said they were, in the course of, what I meant to say was, in the course of negotiations, they were given an option.
Mm-hmm.
And the option that they chose to do, and I think to the benefit of the city as well, is to cut the check.
Okay, thank you for that clarification, and then to elaborate on what that means practically speaking. As Mayor Cahill had stated earlier, the city would go through the repaving process while the project is underway, and then have 18 months, and some days, it's like another 60-day period from the completion of the project to repave all impacted streets. And given that in practice, the addition, while I completely understand the sentiment and agree with the notion that the council should take all efforts practicable to reiterate and ensure for residents that impacted roads will be repaved curb to curb, National Grid has stated their opposition. Our attorney has counseled us in leaving the condition as it reads, and practically speaking, while I agree with the sentiment in listing out each street to provide reassurance to the residents, it doesn't seem as though really anything would change practically, given that if the 18 months were to pass, which is highly unlikely, National Grid would still only have to abide by the terms of the MOA. So with that, I would recommend to my colleagues that we leave the condition as it reads currently. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Councilor Sweeney. Councilor Husband, this was your motion.
I'm going to withdraw my motion. I think that we're witnessing part of the unintended consequences of a flawed process that involves the creation of the MOA as well as anything else. But that's a conversation for a different time. And on balance, although I don't like it, I think that between the amendment to the MOA, which builds in an escalator clause that was absent from the initial MOA, and the mayor's commitment, even though I don't, I know he'll keep his commitment if he's in office. I think on balance, where we end up is not putting in that additional language, but I'm just not happy about it, and I guess I'll just leave it at that. It seems that we are sort of in a conundrum, and that the best way to solve this issue is not through this particular suggested amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Houseman. So with that, Councillor Houseman having withdrawn that motion, I believe that brings us to number 15, which was Mr. Miaris. This was, you had a suggested change for us on condition 15.
Yeah. Brian, can you, there you go. So at the last hearing day, I guess that was Monday, or it might have been Tuesday. Counsel for National Grid suggested, I think incorrectly, that including a condition regarding the laydown area was beyond the scope of your authority. And so we took that to heart, and we suggested that we ought to include in the condition a sentence or two that explains why it is in fact within the scope of your authority. So the sentence at the beginning, I can't read it from here, but I'm hopeful that the rest of you can. I think it is an important point that laydown area, unlike the rest of the project, will have impacts for as long as it's the laydown area, which could be as much as the whole duration of the project. And traffic to and from the laydown area could impact, well, let's use the word incommode the public in the use of the public ways over the whole duration of the project. So we added that suggested language at the beginning to make that point clear. Now, at the end, or I guess that's the middle, is it, Brian? That's there's more, right? Okay, so in the middle, we did hear a concern that having to come to the council to get approval for a laydown area could turn out to be inconvenient if they and cause significant delay to the project. If, for example, they decided they needed to do that on July 1st, it might be hard to get your approval promptly. But even if there is not that much of a delay, even a couple of weeks delay could be disruptive. So what we are proposing here is that NEP be given the ability to go to the commissioner and seek a temporary approval until such time as the full approval can come from you. Something like the way COVID vaccines get approved. It's a temporary approval until they go through the whole process. So that's the idea of that. And, but to be clear, we want to make sure that the existence of a temporary approval is not an invitation to wait until the last possible minute and then spring some kind of temporary approval request on the city. We want to make sure that NEP understands that what we really want them to do is to plan this out and to give you that as much engagement in order to minimize potential disruptions. So that's what the language says. We recommend it.
Thank you, Mr. Maris. Is there a motion to amend condition 15 as recommended by Mr. Maris?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Many seconds. Any further discussion on this one? Counselor Sweeney.
Thank you, Madam President. One clarification question for Attorney Miar is, if I'm reading the proposed amendment correctly, the temporary emergency staging area would need to both be recommended by the Commissioner of Public Works before then coming to the council for approval before such temporary laydown staging area could be established in the city. Is that a correct interpretation of the amendment as you proposed or outlined for us?
In most circumstances, the answer is yes. I can envision a circumstance in which the NEP says, I want this, I need a temporary lay-down area, but I really only need it for 10 days. After that, I'm not going to the council to get this approved personally, I mean, permanently. I can imagine that as being a possibility. But yes, the more likely circumstance is they have an intention to use a lay-down area for some extended period of time, but they need to start right away. And so they would get a temporary approval from the commissioner, followed by a permanent approval from the council.
Okay, thank you. And I would be surprised if such a scenario arose where the commissioner were to grant approval that the council then disapproved of, but it sounds like that possibility could arise in a scenario where commissioner signs off, council for some reason is not in agreement, and the commissioner, but because of the nature of the emergency, National Grid would be able to set up a staging area under that circumstance.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Thank you, Counselor Sweeney. Counselor Bowen.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify the language, until such time as the city council schedules and approves that use. It sounds like it's a bit of process and a bit of defining what temporary means rather than saying a certain period of time. It's saying until such time as the city council can schedule, but it feels like there might be a word missing, like schedule a hearing or schedule a meeting to consider permanent, or not permanent, but to consider that site for approval.
Okay, good catch.
Just sort of a language.
I think that should say, until such time as the council approves that use. You don't need schedules and, okay? And to your point, maybe we need to define temporary to mean not more than 60 days. I think that's,
Counselor Rand.
Brian? You think 60 days is the wrong number?
Yeah, I'm just considering that some of this project seems to be moving in 2-week chunks, so I might recommend a shorter time period.
I know.
Considering what amount of kind of physical and emotional preparedness a business might need to have if someone's going to have like a construction vehicle in front of their business for 2 weeks. That's a long time, so.
Okay, but this, the reason for the 60 days is just because there's a big gap in your schedule of your, in the summer, it's roughly 60 days. So that's the reason why I came up with that number. But I hear you that in most circumstances, that's a long time to be considered temporary. I assume that the commissioner, in giving the approval for a temporary laydown area, would take into consideration the circumstances and place appropriate conditions on it.
Mr. Mayor?
Madam President, thanks. I'm trying not to talk here, but at the same time, I want to help you get through this. If this gets voted and this project begins, we could find ourselves in a place next summer, a year from now, where you don't have a meeting scheduled for 6 or more weeks. Just keep that in mind when looking at the length of a temporary approval. And I think to Attorney Miari's, none of us should assume that the city council, when they do meet to consider, would approve a temporary awarded use. So maybe that language would be until such time as the city council meets to consider the laydown site or something like that. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I see Councilor St. Hilaire is waiting. I want to just mention to Councilor Wren's point, it is true that there is a summer recess, but emergency meetings of the council can be scheduled, so if something were to come up next summer, could be addressed.
Okay, so, but the mayor is suggesting that the word approves there should just say until such time as city council can meet to consider that use, instead of approves it. Okay.
Councilor St. Hilaire.
So I'm a little concerned about the city council approving laydown areas, and I really feel like the Commissioner of Public Works has that authority on every other project in the city. I don't know what expertise we have in that. I guess my question for Mr. Miar is are there state laws or any other laws that sort of govern laydown areas and what can be done and what can't be done? And there are lots of projects that are going on that have laydown areas, and I don't know that we approve any of those laydown areas. So I don't know why we would want to take on that responsibility in this case.
Well, the answer is, I can't think of a single other circumstance that I know of where another kind of a proceeding where you are being asked to, or anyone is being asked to specifically review how the public's use of the public way is going to be impacted. So the reason you don't usually see approvals of laydown areas is because there isn't a standard for doing so. That said, I have personally witnessed circumstances where the use of the laydown area turned out to be the most vexing part of a transmission line project. As it mentions there, when the project is laying the transmission line in front of your house for that 2-week period, it's really annoying, but it's 2 weeks. The laydown area could be for as much as the whole duration of the project, and if it's really annoying, it's going to be really annoying for a long period of time. So we want to make sure that the laydown area, and particularly the routes to and from the laydown area, are selected and controlled in a way that mitigates the impact as much as possible. That's why, for example, I have not suggested that that I have suggested that you need to know what it is, where it is. If the laydown area itself is causing problems, you need to satisfy yourself that the public is not being incommoded in the use of the public way. But certainly the routes within the city from the laydown area, wherever the laydown area is, need to be adequately controlled. In a perfect world, we would have seen a proposal from National Grid in this proceeding that said, this is the laydown area we're going to use and we want you to bless it now. But that's not where we are. So that's the reason it's written in this way.
Was that Councilor St. Hilaire? Councilor Rand.
Thank you so much, and I guess I just want to thank Mr. Miaris for those considerations in crafting some new language for condition 15. And I just maybe want to remind counselors that one of the first times that we talked about laydown conditions, I had a beautiful example of pointing to a constituent's house that had a porta potty put like immediately in front of their house that day. So I'm sure that Commissioner Collins' expertise will help us in this process. I'm also sure that our interaction with constituents will be the sort of the balance to considering laydown and staging areas, because that kind of stuff happens, especially in Ward 2, every day. When you step out of City Hall, take a look at all of the equipment that's floating around this basic area, and you know that there are constituents behind each one of those problems that have reached out to say, when will this end? So I think this is actually a really important condition that will have a bigger impact than it even appears on this page today. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Rand. Councilor Houseman, and then I feel a bit ready to vote on this one after Councilor Houseman. Everyone's had a chance to speak and we're starting to go in circles again.
I'd like to hear from Mr. Riley to help me clarify my understanding of the term layout and laydown.
Mr. O'Leary?
I'm sorry, Mr. O'Leary. Do I understand it to mean, you have to go to the podium, I'm sorry, a staging area where materials are spread out, whether it's, soil that's been dug up, pipes that have to be laid out and so forth? Is that what a laydown or a layout is?
Mr. O'Leary, if you would, please.
Thank you, Mr. House, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk, because this has been, I see the frustration. There's nothing intent, deceitful, lack of communication, National Grid's trying to surprise everybody. There's two different things I think that is being talked about here. One, I'll address your question, Mr. Hausman. A laydown site is exactly the way you described it. It's where a lot of the equipment's stored overnight. Some of the soils are brought out of the roads, shipped up. So it's quite a large site and operation, that is the difficult part of doing business in the North Shore, is there's not a lot of property. There's not a lot of property suitably, environmentally sound, safe, secure. So as we've mentioned before, and I know my words were quite twisted, we do have a site out of the Beverly area, very close, but and we're still working on some other sites not in Beverly. The intent of what we were trying to get done here is for emergency purposes. Tonight, the site we're on could have a fire. I mean, all we're trying to do is have something emergency. Not to say that we planned something 6 months now, but I'm not going to tell you until 5 months and 4 days. It's just to have some flexibility that if our site was damaged for whatever reason, flooded, a fire, we had to try to set up operation to keep going, keep people employed, keep the project going in a timely manner, we would need to try to find something that could be in the city limits of Beverly. And if it's suitable for a temporary or emergency type of approval, then that's what we'd shoot for before coming to the council. The second thing I think is Councilor Rand had mentioned that is a work, I think you're referring to a work zone, like a work zone on the side of the street. We're talking about a laydown, a staging site. They're two different things, and Marissa maybe explained it a little bit better, but, so they're two different things we're talking about here. This is a larger laydown site, Councilor Hausman described it well, and what you're describing is just a work zone. That's a problem, right? But that's something that's controlled, that's something that's not really applicable to this amendment, in my opinion. I'm sorry, that was a long answer. Did that answer?
Thank you. If I may, to Mr. O'Leary again, I'm going to be suggesting an amendment to this language, but I'd like to know your reaction to it as what I'm about to say. So I'm going to say, subject to the provisions of Condition 25, which is the provision that says there'll be no laydown or staging area in Central Cemetery. And I assume you have no problem with that, but while we're at it, while you're standing there, I might as well just ask you, because I feel quite strongly that it should not be used as a staging area.
Yeah, that's not an issue with the
That is not a
company.
problem for you. Okay, good. So I would, when it is in order, and if it's in order, I'll make it now, a friendly amendment that in front of the beginning of that, which says, in the event, that you would add the language subject to the provisions of Condition 25, comma. No, the other way around. So, in the event follows that language. So it starts with subject to the provisions of Condition 25, comma, in the event.
So Councilor Husman's making a motion to add an amendment to the amendment. Is there a second on this motion?
Second.
All those in favor? Councilor Husman's.
Aye.
Thank you. Carries 8-0. We also do have a motion and a second on Mr. Miari's suggested language. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor? Thank you. Motion carries 8-0 on the amendments to Condition 15, including Councilor Husman's friendly amendment. Thank you, councilors. That brings us to condition number 21. Councilor Bowen, I think we're back to you then on my list.
Yes, thank you. Would appreciate reactions and improvements on the language, but what I will propose is intended to address what we discussed at our last meeting about members of the public being able to have their emergency concerns addressed. And it was suggested at that time that, you know, residents could call 911, could call city officials, and that channel of communication would be the most appropriate. I think feasibly that is probably what will happen or what we can require. So the motion would be, I would move to add a sentence at the end of Condition 21 that allows for that, but leaves NEP a little flexibility in what they feel is most feasible by saying, NEP shall include in all public communication about the project a statement about how affected members of the public can reach the project liaison.
Thank you, Councilor Bowen. You're looking for Mr. Miari's reaction to that.
Yes, or fellow councilors' improvements as well.
So Councilor Bowen, just so that I'm clear, that this is your motion.
Yes, my motion is to add that sentence. Shall include in all, yes.
Is there a second on Councilor Bowen's motion?
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Sweeney. Discussion including Mr. Miaris. I think Councilor Bowen was looking for your thoughts, so we'll start there.
The first sentence suggests that the project liaison has to be available to city officials and entities. And the last sentence, as proposed, suggests that the project liaison needs to be available to members of the public. So if you want to expand it to, so that it is available to members of the public, the first sentence will need some tinkering with.
Counselor Bowen.
Thank you. So my personal preference would be that, yes, we expand it so that the public could reach a person directly. My understanding from the last meeting was that that would be met with more opposition from National Grid, and that a sort of middle ground would be just ensuring that the public knows who to call and that National Grid will be responsive to city officials. So I would be comfortable with the project liaison really only answering to city officials and entities and not the public, if it was clear to the public that that's the case and how to get that message through, whether the public should call 911 or should call their city councilors. And so I struggled a bit with language to propose, and
Okay.
if National Grid felt the best way for members of the public to reach the project liaison was directly, that would work. So I don't know if there's a tweak to that language that gives that flexibility.
Seems like that's a question for National Grid, doesn't it? So let's ask it.
Attorney Pizzi?
I'm sorry, would you mind repeating the question? I'm not sure I quite followed.
Counselor Bowen.
Absolutely. So the concern that was raised by residents was if, the metal plate caves in the middle of the night in front of my house, what do I do? Because the hotline number that's available to me as a resident is not manned at 2 a.m. And so essentially the problem I'm trying to solve for is, how does a member of the public know that there is in fact an emergency response available, even if it's through an intermediary? And so my preference would be that there just be no intermediary, that residents could get an answer at 2 a.m. from the responsible party. Failing that, I think the onus is on National Grid to communicate to residents. Similar to, we have the condition around the hotline is there, but it doesn't address that concern we heard last time about kind of middle of the night. So trying to find a piece of language that would build in communications about the fact that there is a project liaison who has authority to address emergencies, so that residents are aware of that fact and know how to get a message to that person, even if it's not by calling themselves.
Thank you, Counselor Bowen.
Thank you for that clarification. I may just need a moment to confirm. My understanding, I think originally of this condition was that it would be a way for city officials to contact the project liaison 24/7, and that if a resident had an issue, like you're saying, in the middle of the night, presumably they'd call the police, the fire department, whoever, and that entity would then reach out to the project liaison. I suppose I'd have a little bit of concern with giving out a project liaison's number.
If I may, Attorney Pizzi, if this is helpful,
Yeah.
I think I understand Counselor Bowen to be suggesting that if National Grid's assessment is you would call the fire department or the police, who could then contact that person. I believe Counselor Bowen is suggesting National Grid communicate that piece of information and the best way to word that. Is that correct? Am I restating your?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And are you asking for that to be stated here, or just to be included in our communications publicly?
Yes, so I'm hoping that we can write a condition that would require you to add to your communications that information about how to, that a project liaison, that emergency action is possible, and how, in your view, the public can reach them.
Okay. So.
Could be by calling 911.
Okay. I think as stated, I think we'd be okay with it as long as it's, I think, hearing what you're saying, it's not suggesting that we need to put them directly in touch with the project liaison, just a way that a message can get to the project liaison, I think seems reasonable.
Thank you, Attorney Pizzi. Mr. Meares.
He was more generous than I was. I think what you want to you don't want to say how they can reach the project liaison, because by definition we're not giving them the information for how to reach the project liaison. The question is about well, yeah.
Counselor Bowen.
Thank you. It could be
There you go.
as simple, and I don't know how we would frame it in the condition, but as simple as including the hotline, but the hotline having a message that says if this is an emergency, National Grid can be reached via calling the emergency services, sort of like when you call a doctor's office and they say if this is an emergency, hang up
And
and
dial
dial
911. Exactly the same thing I was thinking.
So just somehow that whatever information residents have about what to do when they have a concern includes emergency circumstances.
So it looks like Mr. Bertram has made an edit to capture what you're saying, Counselor Bowen.
I like that.
And while you're having a chance to read it over, I'll go to Counselor Feldman.
My only point was going to be the original wording of Counselor Bowen's addition really left it to the discretion of National Grid what that was going to be. And I didn't think it needed to be any more clear because we have conveyed that it said National Grid needs to communicate to the public how they can contact the project liaison. It doesn't say which way and 911. This could be more limiting than leaving it with the ball in their court, with them using their discretion as to the best way to get a hold of them. Because now it's definitely going to emergency services this way. But if we left it up to them to decide based on what the project was, or if it changed, or if a hotline came up, it was open-ended the way you had worded it. That's my thought. Sorry, I didn't want to belabor the point, but I thought it was fine.
I was just going to suggest simpler language that says NEP shall include in all public communications about the project information about, how members of the public may contact the city in the case of an emergency, right? Period.
Yeah.
Or who they should contact in the case of an emergency.
Counselor Bowen, this is your amendment. I'm going to let you make the motion how you want it to finally sound, and then after you make the motion, I'll look for a second.
I see the edits happening in real time.
Capture the last one and see how it works too.
Information about
Communications about the project. Ryan, you need a "the" in the
Information about.
project that the public should, in the case of emergency, contact the city's emergency services.
Yeah, I think that.
Council President, could we have Councilor St. Hilaire restate his language for clarity?
It sounded like a friendly amendment.
I think it's close. NEP shall include in all public communications about the project, I would say
It doesn't do that.
yeah, information about who the public should contact in case of an emergency, something like that.
Mr. Mayor, did you want to? Mr. Mayor, please.
About in case of emergency, period.
Period, yeah.
Madam President, I'm guessing that it's pretty standard fare that in communications, Grid probably has good language in terms of how to contact the project liaison. And absolutely, the public should contact 911 in case of an emergency, but there are a whole lot of contacts that can be made that shouldn't go there. So if this is going to, it should be first and foremost how to contact the project liaison, right? And then, you know, what people already know, if there's what feels to be an emergency, they should call 911. But I wouldn't want our 911 services to start getting calls that don't really need to go there. I want to make sure the project liaison, whether it's a number or an email or a combination of those contacts, that they're front and center in everything. Make
If I
sense?
may, Mr. Mayor, I agree with that, actually. I think we all do. At our last meeting, National Grid was unwilling to let the public contact the public liaison, and the project liaison. And so I think what Counselor, I don't want to speak for Counselor Bone, I think we're trying to get at a way that members of the public know who, what we were told was they should contact emergency services, who would contact the liaison in the middle of the night. So I think we're trying to get at a way that the public would know who to contact, which maybe that Counselor Bone, your original language, as Counselor Feldman suggests, might have been the best way to get at this.
I'm comfortable with this language as it appears on the screen now, for that reason, because I think the situation we're trying to avoid is having all communications from National Grid say, if there is an issue, call this hotline, and then have residents call that hotline and it be a voicemail that's not going to be responded to until 2 days later. So just want the communications to be balanced, to say, if you have an issue, call this hotline, and in the case of an emergency, something else. Or if you have an issue, call this hotline, and the hotline itself communicates that you need to call 911, or any way they want to do it, but just to avoid that situation where we frustrate residents further.
Counselor St. Hilaire.
One last minor suggestion. NEP shall include in all public communications about the project information about the hotline, potentially, and who the public should contact in the case of an emergency. And I don't know if the hotline is the right word, but that will work.
There is, I think on our
that's
website,
it, yeah.
there is a hotline. We
Brian?
may refer to condition 29 that
Yeah,
contains the.
29F.
Yes.
So, about the toll-free project hotline referenced in condition 29F.
So
Counselor
I move that we accept this language.
Very good, Counselor Bowen.
As now written on the screen.
Is there a second to Counselor?
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. That carries 8-0. I think, Counselor Crowley, you were a yes on that?
Yes, I will.
Okay, sorry.
Yes, no, sorry.
Didn't want to miscount you.
Man, sorry, I was again, you know.
I thought so, and then I thought, what if I'm miscounting? That brings us, thank you, Counselor Bowen, and thank you, Counselor St. Hilaire, for collaborating there. That brings us to 23. Counselor Rand, I think this was yours.
Thank you so much. Okay, let's see. I motion to include, in which sentence, hold on. What I'd like to include is, and provide written reports of such activity to the city council. So I think that would go after the very first sentence, after project route. Open to suggestions on the, or have it be its own sentence, I guess, too, would work. To the city council. Oh, written reports of such activity to the city council. The idea is to get information about which trees are going to be affected.
Thank you, Counselor Rand. So Counselor Rand has made a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Mr. Miaris.
I think we've been careful in other places to say that reports of this sort that are being submitted to the city council ought to be submitted to the advisory committee as well. So I think we're using the word "the committee." So
Thank you, Mr. Miaris.
I would like to amend my motion to include the committee.
Thank you. Is there a second to Counselor Rand's amended motion? Thank you, Counselor Feldman. Any discussion? Sorry, Counselor St. Hilaire.
I guess, would there be any concern as to when they need to provide the written report by, or how often? It suggests written reports, plural. Just Mr. Miari's, any concern there, or is as is okay?
Upon completion of report.
I guess prior to commencement.
How about if we stick the word promptly in front of provide? I think we want to stay away from micromanaging this too much, but promptly
I'd like to,
suggest that we have the expectation that these things be passed along in a timely fashion.
I'd like to amend my motion to include promptly, please.
Ryan, you need a Y at
I
the
was
end of
going to say
promptly.
Mr. Bertram. Thank you. Is there a second on Counselor Rand's amended motion?
Second.
Thank you again, Counselor Feldman. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries 8-0 on Counselor Rand's amendment. This brings us to 29. Counselor Rand, this is you again.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. I would like to, let's see. I would like to make a motion to add under 29E to specifically include laydown, staging, and storage areas at the end. So project activities, including all construction activities, comma, locations, comma, laydown, staging, and storage areas. And laydown, staging, and storage areas. I understand that it's somewhat implied with locations and activities, but I just want to be specific about that.
So Counselor Rand has made a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Counselor Bowen. Any discussion? Mr. Miaris, any discussion from you?
No, I think it's fine.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Carries 8-0.
I did have one other on 29.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, I didn't realize that. Yes, please.
Thank you. Okay, and then I'd like to make a motion to add 29H to say that all reports listed in condition number 8, the EMF measurement plan and subsequent reports, and laydown, staging, and storage areas be posted to the project website. Sorry, I know, I was trying to go slowly. Okay, so I'm making a motion to add another section to 29, so it would be 29H. And the motion is that, okay, NEP shall, I'm gonna work this backwards, shall post to the project website all the reports listed in condition number 8, comma, the EMF measurement plan and subsequent reports, comma, and laydown, staging, and storage areas. And that's it, actually.
So Counselor Rand has made a motion. Is there a second?
Second. And a friendly amendment.
Counselor Houseman.
Yeah, I just blanked out. Maybe it's the time of night. I think that also, I know, I gotta find the condition, but basically, a copy of all the approvals Determinations, approvals, actually, it's number 30, hang on a second here.
32.
In a copy of plan reports, and determinations, approvals, and amendments listed in condition 32. So that information wouldn't go only to the council and the Citizens Advisory Committee, it would go to the general public on the website as well. So that would be an update to them. So condition 32 talks about the commissioner giving waivers and approvals and so forth to plans and that NEP has submitted. Why should it just come to us? Why not have it go to the, it'll come to us for sure, and the committee, but it'll also go on the website and be available to the general public on a real-time basis.
So Councilor Houseman has made a motion to make an amendment to the amendment. Is there a second on that?
Second?
Thank you. Is there discussion? And Councilor Wren, particularly, originally your amendment, any comment or problem with adding this?
I'm just sort of rereading condition number 32, and I guess, Mike, I just want to make sure, these additions for me were all about access and transparency, so I want to make sure that adding this would not, like, muddy the communication for sort of like basic reports, so I'm just kind of thinking about that in real time, as we all are.
The entire, as Councilor Houseman has made a motion to amend the amendment, if you want to, if it's easier to see the full. Councilor Houseman.
So, because we're doing this on the fly, one of the things that may not be listed on the website right now is the MOA and the amendment to the MOA, and the determinations, approvals, and amendments, which relate to them, and so they should be there as well, so there's context to those determinations, approvals, and amendments.
Yeah.
But it seems to me, why wouldn't we want the MOA and its amendment to be on the website for the general public to readily access?
Thank you, Councilor Houseman. Councilor Rand?
I'm in agreement with that.
Councilor Bone, you had your hand up.
We'll need to ask a question, because I support that in general. Just curious if anything that would be transmitted to the council and committee in condition 32 would be, I know there were issues about the plans originally, sort of like secure information. My brain is not coming up with good words right now, but
Privileged?
sensitive, confidential. There you go. So just if that would be a problem at all, but otherwise, or if there's a way to, except for confidential information, something like that. But generally support both of those.
Mr. Mayoris.
So I'm going to have some, after this, I'm going to have some suggestions to maybe, excuse me, clean up the language a little bit. But as far as in response to this specific question, those determinations, approvals, and amendments are all public records. So saying that they need to be posted should not be a problem. Even when there is information in connection with an approval that is confidential, the approval itself is a public record and will undoubtedly be drafted in a way so that the confidential information is not revealed. So I don't think that part is a problem. So now, as far as drafting elegance goes, several of the other provisions here begin the sentence, the project website shall contain. And I think we probably should stick with that phraseology at the beginning. Okay. Okay. Then, in number 1, it should say, all reports listed in condition 8. Just to refresh my memory. Okay. The EMF measurement plan listed in condition 12, and all subsequent reports pertaining to okay, so I should say, I'm sorry. The EMF measurement plan and all subsequent reports that's all right. The way you did it there, Brian, is good. I'm all right with that. Okay. Now, the third one, though, lay down staging and storage areas. I'm not sure what we're trying to get at there, but are we saying any approvals of lay down staging and storage areas? Is that what you're trying to get at?
Yeah, I think a place for the plan or approved storage areas to be visible to the public is what I'm looking for. So like, and approved lay down staging and storage areas. Approved and temporary, I don't know, or locations of
Okay, so
lay down staging.
so that number 3 is
Time for you, so.
that number 3 is actually
Go back and forth.
subsumed within number 4, it seems to me. But if you want it to be, separate, the location.
I think if it's covered, if the recommendation is that it's covered in number 4, I'm all for simplifying. Fewer words are usually, or can be better. So if the advice is that that is specifically covered, I guess I want it to be accessible and transparent. That's something that someone can click on and say, oh, look, I can see where this project has their storage area.
Mm-hmm. Well, how about then we keep 3 and just say information concerning the location of any, I'm sorry. Proposed, any approved lay-down staging and storage areas. Okay.
Councilor Rand.
I'm very sorry I forgot to include what I added to condition 23, the written report of the, from the certified arborist. I'd like that to also be in this requirement for reports posted online.
So from condition 23.
So, yeah.
Councilor Crowley.
The only question I had for Mr. Miaris is on the, when we said the approved laydown areas, is that, would that also include the temporary ones if we just leave it as approved?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
So at this point, Councilor Rand.
What?
Well, before you, yes, in a moment, but I am mindful that we do have a motion and a second on Councilor Houseman's addition to this amendment, and so that's on the floor. Councilor Houseman?
Yeah, so number 5 is not quite done yet, so we need to include reference to the MOA, copies of, well, no, it would go
Because it's
first.
in
It would go
32.
first because the determinations, approvals, and so forth follow from the MOA. So 5, the MOA, comma, and copies of, as you have there, but you also have, there's also reference in 32 to orders. So you should add to that list after amendments, orders, or before, after approval, maybe orders.
Can't we just say everything in 32?
I thought about that. I mean, you could just say all written documents prepared pursuant to condition, prepared condition, described in condition 32 would be a shorter way of doing the same thing. Ms. Mary Ortiz
okay.
can check the drafting elegance, as you put it.
Okay, so, Brian, I think copies, so after the word MOA, I think you want an and then you want a 6, right? Okay. I caution you to say that you don't want to say all documents prepared in connection with any of these approvals, because, you know, that...
So broad.
That's too broad. Everything that the commissioner, then every email he sends and whatever,
Yep.
that's not what you want. You just want the answers. So, I just caution you about
Yeah.
asking for too much.
Through you. So what's there looks okay to you? And number 5? Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, he covered the MOA. So, oh, okay. Yeah, I guess that's fine. I think 5 and 6, the way he's done it. But there should also be a 7, which is this document. The order of conditions.
Okay. Why don't we add this document to number 5 instead of having it be number 7?
Yeah, that's fine, yeah.
A copy of the MOA and this
And,
this grant of location.
Yeah.
So in that case, Counselor Houseman, if
So
you
that's an
would,
amendment to my original motion.
would you restate your, yes, let's do yours first. We're going to work
So
parenthetically.
I will restate my motion.
Please.
Motion is to add a listing of 5, as follows. 5, a copy of the MOA and this grant of location, semicolon, and 6, copies of determinations, approvals, amendments, and orders listed in condition 32.
Is there a second on Counselor Houseman's amendment to the amendment? Are you the second, Counselor St. Hilaire? Second. Thank you, thank you. Any further discussion on the amendment to the amendment? All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, carries 8-0. Counselor Van, that brings us back to you.
Okay, I would like to amend my motion to include Counselor Houseman's amendment. And do I need to read all of what's there? Or
You can just point to the screen
I
and
would
say
say
you
as
want
read.
that.
H
up there?
wording as proposed?
Is there a second to Counselor?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, carries 8-0. Counselor Rand, that takes care of both of yours on condition 29? Counselor Houseman, I think if my list is correct, this brings us to the final proposed amendment, and it's you on condition 30.
Yeah, it's just a cleanup reference. If we have, did we end up, I believe, we did end up defining the N-192 Replacement Project Citizens Advisory Committee as a defined term called committee.
Yes.
In condition 32, there should be a change to the wording to simply use the defined term instead of listing that whole thing. There you go.
Is that your motion?
My motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on that one? All those in favor? Aye. Thank you. Motion carries 8-0 on that edit to condition 30. Thank you. Mr. Miaris,
In the course of doing all this, I did find a typo.
please.
I don't think you need to make a motion, but in condition 9, on line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the word plan should be capitalized.
Thank you.
I so move.
We'll be very formal, but is there a second to capitalize?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
There you go. A vote to capitalize plan. 8-0, I should have said that. Sorry, Ms. Kent, I'll declare that. 8-0. Counselor Bone, you have a question?
Yes, just, I heard Counselor Houseman refer to condition 32 while we were discussing condition 30, and I believe the same amendment could be made, or the same edit could be made to change Citizens Advisory Committee to just committee in condition 32
Oh,
as
true.
well.
You want to make that motion, Counselor Bone?
Yes, so moved.
Is there a second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Carries 8-0. Thank you. Good catch, Counselor Bowen. With that, I'm going to ask Counselor Rand to switch seats with me and take the chair. She will call for the vote, but as I said at the beginning, I would like an opportunity just to speak as not the president. Thank you, Counselor Rand. Thank you. Just for those who are less familiar with parliamentary procedure, well, you just witnessed a lot of it, so maybe now you're all experts. But as I mentioned at the beginning, one of the rules is that the president or the chair cannot speak, offer an opinion when in that seat. And so typically you would see Councilor Rotundo, who's the council vice president, change with me. I'm now speaking as a councilor. Councilor Rand is now the chair, and I will not be able to return to the chair's seat until this question is closed. That's why I said Councilor Rand will actually call for the question. I just wanted to have a moment, and I thank my fellow councilors for their indulgence, because it slightly does feel out of order, because everyone else had a chance to speak at the beginning. But I did just want to have a moment to speak as a councilor and to just offer a few thoughts, and I will try to be brief, largely because throughout this process, it's been an interesting journey for me, as along with many of you, because when we began to explore what this might look like, I was not the council president and had a different role, a much more involved role in some ways. And then the course of elections change. And so I found myself learning a new role. And in some ways that means holding the space, but also holding your tongue in a different kind of way. But I do want to just take a moment now, speaking as a counselor, to say, as my fellow counselors did, first of all, and probably most importantly, a tremendous thank you to the residents who really, as I said, began digging in on this with us, members of the council, long before this grant of location was filed. But unfortunately, not as early as we would have liked, because there was not a full and robust public process. And that's, I think in many ways, is what's brought us to the point that we're at, where we've been able to dig in and do this work and strive together to do the best that we can for our residents and to avoid their being incommoded. If nothing else, I did learn a new legal word from this process. I do want to just take the opportunity to share, in some ways it brings us full circle, because I have been moved throughout this process by many things that residents have brought to us. In part, what Councilor Feldman referenced, just the way that residents have come together and advocated for their neighbors, and in some cases, advocated for their neighbors whether or not they themselves lived in the impacted areas. I think we've seen that happen here, that residents who have reached out to us or have come and sat in these benches are not only residents along the route, but many other residents from across the city. And I think that's worth noting, because that to me says this isn't just about who's on the route, who's impacted, it's a thinking in a very community-minded way. The other piece of this that I think has really pointed us towards community-minded thinking has been the attention to care of our environment and to health and human safety. And Mr. Mahood, you're here tonight, and I just mention him specifically because many residents have come every single time to our meetings, and Mr. Mahood, you've been very consistent in your message and your reminder to us to remember that in the midst of all of this, also the care and keeping of our environment and moving away from dependence on fossil fuels has to be part of our forward-looking future. it's something that matches Mayor Cahill's priorities for our community. I think it's something that matches where Beverly needs to go, and so I've been appreciative, if I may, and I do have Mr. Mahood permission to share just a few of the words that he sent to me that I think I want to sort of bring us full circle with. He talks about how he would come each time and ask for what the commitment would be, and we heard Councilor Houseman ask for that today, and so I just want to mention these words. Mr. Mahood reminds us that our civic responsibility, it's a question, what is our civic responsibility if we can't hold these companies accountable and provide a habitable planet for future generations? For years, many of us have been fighting for clean energy, protecting biodiversity, clean coasts and oceans, environmental and social justice, and other long-term ecological solutions, and it has been an uphill battle against well-funded opponents. The minimum we should expect from National Grid is to purchase carbon offsets for the Regional Transmission Reliability Project. Consuming natural resources isn't free, and the cost of burning fossil fuels shouldn't be either. And lastly, he reminds us, the purchasing of carbon offsets or any kind of mitigation strategy, I'm adding this to your words, any kind of mitigation strategy that might occur, and we heard Attorney Pizzi reference some of this tonight, and I appreciate that. It isn't charity. It is your policy, and it is our shared future. I quote from Mr. Mahood's words because I think as we move forward, many councilors have referenced, as Councilor Rand did, that the hard work now will be before us, and that is continuing to hold National Grid and our city to the standards that we have just talked about, and I hope that we can keep this one front and center along with all the others. The last thing I want to say, I'm going to quote another resident who doesn't know I'm going to quote her. I was moved at one point during our proceedings. There was a meeting where, in the course of conversation, Mr. Riley suggested that residents' opinions were not facts. And I was moved when Carol Rain came to the podium and said to us, and this has stayed with me, what I want to say is not a fact, but it is the truth. And I've thought a lot about that. Things that are not facts, but they are the truth. And the truth that Ms. Rain lifted up was about lack of trust. Lack of trust in the process, lack of trust in how things had played out, lack of trust in National Grid in these moments. That is a truth that has been clear here throughout these proceedings. And so I guess what I want to say to National Grid, particularly at this moment, is this is an invitation as we move forward in whatever form the council has yet to vote, but this is an invitation to rebuild some of that trust by adhering to conditions that may be imposed, by working to create a greener and cleaner future, to valuing residents as more than ratepayers, and to go above and beyond to ensure a commitment to forward thinking about health and human safety, environmental care and stewardship, and to working to build and to respect the relationship with the Citizen Advisory Committee that we codified in the conditions we've been drafting. I think hearing without defensiveness as much as possible the truth that there is a lack of trust, and seeing this as an invitation to what could be by leaning into working together to rebuild some of that in the way that this project may unfold. That's my hope. That's what I commit to holding not only National Grid but the city accountable for, and I just want to mention that before we have an opportunity to take the vote. And again, my thanks to all those who put in so much time on this, including my fellow councilors. Thank you.
Thank you, President Flowers. So now I will call the vote for order number 65, National Grid, New England Power Company petition for transmission land franchise. I guess that's all it says here. So I would accept a motion to approve.
So moved.
Councilor Rand, point of order.
Sure.
I think to be clear, I think a motion to approve with the conditions as amended and passed tonight.
Okay, let me try that again. So I would accept a motion to approve with the conditions that we have prepared and amended this evening.
So moved.
And those in favor? Oh, sorry, second?
Second.
For discussion?
Second for discussion? Did I hear?
Second.
Okay,
For discussion.
there's discussion.
I just would like to run the motion by our council to make sure that we have not that it's airtight for purposes of what we are trying to accomplish here, that we have not left anything out of the motion that would be problematic, that it accomplishes its purpose.
Mr. Miaris or Solicitor Williams? Okay, we're getting the thumbs up. So there was a second for discussion. Any other discussion? Those in favor? And opposed? Motion passes, 8 to 0. Oh, no, 7 to 0. 7 to 0. There's no Todd.
Yeah, but it's not you.
Oh, there's, no, there's,
Did you vote against?
You just voted no.
I voted no.
Oh, you voted
So
no.
I voted no.
7-1.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
She voted no.
It's not even
So it was
1 a.m.
7 to 1. I know. 4 days. I was gonna say 0.
That's for a loop there.
Thank you. Thank you, Counselor Rand. Thank you again to all of the residents. Thank you, Mayor Cahill and your team for being here with us.
What was it?
I know the exciting, interesting part is over, but Counselors, we have one more.
For the clerk, there is 2 documents. One is how we amended it tonight.
Okay.
Used during the meeting. The other one is completely clean and ready for signature.
Okay. All right, great, thank you. There also wasn't a motion to adjourn.
Counselors, we have one other order of business under unfinished business from a previous meeting. This is Order 189, Community Preservation Committee out-of-cycle application for $400,000 for Briscoe Village for Living and the Arts. This is just to set a public hearing. I would entertain a motion to set that public hearing for August 15th at 6:45 PM.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 8-0, so that public hearing will happen on August 15th, 6:45 PM. That will be in the context of a special meeting, and it's likely we can expect to see some other business at that agenda as well. With that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Thank you very much. We're adjourned.
I know.
I know, I feel